The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 101 Secret Dream. Lex internally raised an eyebrow as he was surprised at the hidden quest notification. The last time he got it was when he completed a hidden requirement, but this time his conversation with Alexander triggered the quest. He couldn't tell what exactly was the difference between triggering a normal quest and a hidden one, but based on the rewards he got last time he was looking forward to it. He quickly read the quest. Eden quest. Despite your lackluster performance, a guest has become interested in becoming a permanent resident of the Midnight Inn. Develop a permanent guest district. To develop a permanent guest district you must purchase a permanent guest district pass. Allocate area of permanent guest district. Raise in rating to 3 stars. Grow a winding road vine. Have at least 1 karmic lily. Time limit, none. Quest reward, subject to change based on performance. Lex was quite surprised. This was the first time he encountered a quest that had multiple requirements, with each one being very difficult to achieve. Along with the details of each step in the quest, Lex also received additional information about the last 2 parts of the quest. They were extremely difficult, as at least the first 3 could be completed with the system's help. The last 2 were plants that Lex needed to grow, but first he would need to find their seeds or the actual plants themselves. Winding road vine was an unusual vine that only grew in the cracks between space, whatever that meant. The karmic lily itself had no use, but was used as a supplementary ingredient for many things from alchemy to crafting items to setting up arrays and more. The reason why it was so useful was that it enabled one to influence karma. He was also given brief requirements from guests to be able to get a permanent residence at the Midnight Inn, which made him breathe a sigh of relief as even the Morrisons would not be able to get a permanent residence, giving him plenty of time to set it up. Yes, Lex replied to Alexander, we offer permanent residences instead of rooms to guests. But before one can get a permanent room they need to fulfill certain requirements. The first one is to spend 1 trillion MP at the inn. Lex's smile did not waver as he spoke but Alexander was visibly shook. But he recovered quickly. It made sense. The inn catered to the whole universe. How can the wealth of a family that only owns 1 planet compare to the wealth to those that might even own entire solar systems, or more? In that case, I'd just like the courtyard for 2 weeks. Of course, replied Lex and charged Helen. The duo was just about to head out when they saw a strange shadow pass them by, and looked up into the air to see Aisha flying with little Blue. Alexander only took a moment before he started walking to Main Street. He had quickly adjusted his mindset to not be bothered by what he saw at the inn. Furthermore, he had another objective in coming here. Last time he returned to Earth he received a message from Russian Princess 77. She asked him to send her money in a certain account, and in exchange she will give him some very useful information. Since he had not been disappointed by her before, Alexander transferred the money. She responded by telling him he should see John at the Midnight Inn to get something useful. Most likely, Alexander would have encountered John anyway, so the mischievous girl extorted him for some money before he got the chance. As Lex watched them go he smiled as he was ready to do something he had been wanting to do for a while now. He simply had to wait for a few guests to appear before he could do what he wanted, yet right before he was about to leave he felt more guests coming. This time the guests were coming through the golden door, and since its origin planet was Vegas Minima he readied his butter knife. Fortunately, the guest that appeared this time was not a zombie. A man came limping out of the door, moving as quickly as he could manage. He was bleeding from his forehead and his right arm and leg seemed to be severely hurt. He must have been running from something because it took him a moment to realize his surroundings had changed. Alarmed, he stopped to survey his new environment and when he saw Lex he quickly took a step back and assumed a defensive position. Name, Slag. Age, 99. Sex, male. Cultivation details, golden core mid. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Condition. Debilitating wounds across his body, but his cultivation is secure and will heal quickly given the chance. Remarks, he has the smell of a soldier all over him. He's probably broke. Meh. No need to be alarmed, dear guest. No one will harm you. Welcome to the Midnight Inn, you may call me the Innkeeper. As soon as Slag heard the term midnight he was greatly surprised. All captain-level soldiers and above were briefed a few days ago that they might be embarking on mission midnight and all non-essential operations were halted for the time. He did not know the details nor the relevance of the term, but he did not believe for even a second that the term being repeated here was a coincidence. It appears as though you are injured. Would you like to go to the recovery room? Slag quickly realized that he hadn't responded to the Innkeeper and quickly gathered his thoughts. His priority in this situation was to quickly learn his new circumstances, gather as much information as possible and return to Vegas Minima as soon as possible. Where are my manners, excuse me? I am Lieutenant Slag of the 7th Forward Battalion, under the command of General Ragnar of the Jotun Empire. If you have any medical facility, then I would be grateful for your timely assistance, and be sure to pass on news of your aid to the Empire. Informing the other of his true background may seem like a stupid idea to some, but Slag had enough training to judge the situation accurately. The innkeeper was clearly someone with a higher cultivation than himself, and usually it was very difficult to lie or keep secrets when the difference in cultivation between two people was massive. Furthermore, the identity of belonging to a battalion from the Jotun Empire was nothing to scoff at, and carried sufficient deterrence to assure his safety in most situations. In fact, very few other than demons would even consider any kind of hostility against him. Yet he was slightly disappointed when he saw the other had no significant reaction at the mention of the Empire. "Follow me," said the innkeeper warmly, and started leading Slag towards the recovery room. The Midnight Inn offers many services, not just medical attention. Once you have recovered, I encourage you to tour the place. In a couple of days we're going to be having a grand event hosting dignitaries from many planets. If you're free, then you might want to stay for the event. Slag mentally linked the date of the event with the date for Operation Midnight and confirmed that this place definitely had something to do with the operation. When they reached the recovery room, Slag was dumbfounded to learn that he was expected to pay. He had no money on his person, and no payment tool. You just need to agree to pay and decide which of your assets you want to pay with, and the inn will take care of it. Or, you can forward the bill to your battalion, as this is technically an operational expense, don't you think? Slag was dumbfounded and confused by what the innkeeper said, but then found a digital panel that appeared in the air in front of him that required his signature. Should he sign, his expenses from the inn would be forwarded to the battalion. Unsure if this was a scam, Slag eventually signed, as he was sure no one could scam the battalion, and got in the recovery pod. Leaving his newest guest to recover, Lex was finally free to do what he had wanted earlier. He returned to his residence, removed his suit and wore the Clark Kent glasses. Donning the appearance of Leo, Lex quickly teleported to the gamer's den, ready to finally interact with his guests without worry. He found Z sobbing in the corner as he watched an episode of My Truth in December. "Can you guess this one?" and shook his head. This kid had too much time. Lex should think of ways to go and play outside. He froze as soon as that thought came to him. "Great, now I'm sounding like my parents," he complained, but quickly put it behind him. He would start laying the road for his secret dream of hosting an interplanetary gaming tournament today. Chapter 102: The Mind of the Weak, the Will of the Strong. With a wide grin, Leo walked out of the gamer's den and looked around. Other than the patrolling guards, he didn't see anyone. He had already planted the seeds of becoming a gamer in Helen, so she would be an easy pull, therefore he should look for other unsuspecting targets. Lily and Chen were decent options. As natives of Earth, he doubted he could entice Hera and William, and Jimmy was still too young. He also doubted that he could get Slag to put up his feet and game casually. With his decision made, he strode into the guild room to find the pair having a discussion with the staff. Clearly they were interested in what the guild offered. "Hello, hope I'm not disturbing anything important. I just wanted to introduce myself," Leo said enthusiastically. "My name's Leo, the owner of the humble gamer's den next door." Lily and Chen looked at the young man, responding politely with a hello. They were not sure what services the gamer's den offered, but nothing here was simple, so they dared not dismiss it. "I'm sure you're wondering what the gamer's den does, and what we have to offer. Let me cut right to the chase. What we offer is nothing short of enriching your life and elevating your state of mind." Leo's words clearly attracted their attention. But Leo smirked. He would not tell them all the details directly. Building suspense and curiosity were an integral part of of enlightening non-gamers into entering a new world. "I don't want to take up too much of your time, clearly you are busy. But when you get the chance, do drop by. We have something for everyone." "We will definitely drop by," said Lily politely. It was evident that they would not leave until they finished their business with the Morrison family, so he didn't even try to pull them away right now. He wondered where the others were. Without the host attire connecting him to the inn, he could not do his usual scan to locate all his guests. It was an unfortunate drawback. Maybe once his authority increased, he would be able to do it even without the suit. He exited the guild room just in time to see Alexander and Helen enter the battle axe. Finally, John would get his first customer. Since no one else was in view, he retreated to the gamer's den and teleported back to his residence and donned the host attire. He would use it to spy on how things were going with Alexander and monitor everyone else. As soon as they entered Main Street, he would return as Leo and proceed with his plan. In the battle axe, Alexander and Helen politely told Doe that they wanted to meet with John. After only a few moments, John let them into his office. Alexander did not show any reaction at the appearance of the man covered in chains, but Helen looked at him oddly. "Well, then, which one of you wants it done? Or is it both of you?" John asked excitedly. He finally had some customers and could earn some MP. Before anything, could you tell me what exactly you are going to do? Huh? Don't you know? John asked them, surprised. Then it occurred to him that he had put up no details outside his shop, nor advertised his service. How was anyone supposed to know what he did? A significant oversight, but it was not too late to fix it now. Well, let me explain. I design spirit techniques most suited to a person. You can tell me what kind of technique you want, and based on your cultivation, affinity, strength and many more things I will design the technique for you. That's not to say that if you teach it to others they won't be able to perform the technique as well, but if, say for example you can use 100% of the technique's capabilities, others might be able to use 50%. For once, the duo was not surprised. They had surprise fatigue. Nothing could surprise them anymore. Nodding as if he had heard the most natural thing, Alexander took out the 6 floating blades behind him. These are my weapons. I can move them freely within 100 meters of myself and can imbue them with my spirit energy regardless of how far they are. I have various techniques that allow me to attack with them, but I want a stronger attack. A secret technique or trump card, whatever you want to call it, I want a technique that will maximize their damage. John smiled at the young man who did not even ask him the price. If it were up to him, he would charge him a ridiculous amount. Unfortunately, Doe handled the transactions and the price for each cultivation level was fixed. Furthermore, the innkeeper would directly deduct 50% of all his income as payment for keeping him here. The fee for making a technique for a Foundation Realm cultivator was 1000 MP, so John would make 500 MP, just enough to go to the mystery trial. I want a technique to detect if someone is spying on me. Helen interrupted his thoughts with her own request. John, however, was not irritated at the interruption but happy instead. 2 customers. Even though the fee for a chi training cultivator was only 300 MP, income was still income. Let's start with the young lady first, John said as he began questioning Helen in detail. The duo stayed at the battle axe for well over an hour, adding an expense of another 1300 MP under Helen's prestige counter. During that time Will and Hera visited the guild room as well. Recognizing each other from their previous visit, the 2 groups started chatting. Learning that Lily and Chen were here for trade, Hera quickly offered them a few deals as well. Since they already had an agreement with the Morrisons, they did not give up any of their current haul, but agreed to conduct future trades with them as well. Eventually Will and Hera left as well, and Chen and Lily decided it was unwise to simply wait for the Morrisons. They asked the staff member to inform them when the Morrions came, and left to investigate the gamer's den. Lex immediately returned to the den in the appearance of Leo and awaited his clients. Behind the counter Z was dozing off on the keyboard. Even though the child had his own residence, he barely left the Denver. He had fallen asleep watching anime, again. Leo really would have to think of a solution for this. But his thoughts were interrupted by Chen entering the shop, looking around curiously. Welcome guests, I'm glad you decided to drop by, Leo said, rubbing his hands like a merchant ready to rip some people off. Chen and Lily looked around the shop, but did not recognize the computers. Even though their own civilization was more advanced, the way their technology advanced was different, so they did not have computers that looked like this. I must admit, I was curious about how this place could enrich my life, said Lily. Leo laughed. Of course this place could enrich their lives, but he could not do so by saying they should play games. People who had spent their entire lives fighting for survival, combating vicious enemies and barely scraping by would not have the temperament to relax and play games. They would not be able to immerse themselves in the game with that mentality. Leo would have to prime them first. How the gamer's den does that is very simple, yet at the same time very sophisticated. Please, have a seat. Let me ask you a few questions first. Lily sat down on one of the gamer chairs and looked at Leo, awaiting his instructions. Now close your eyes and relax. Let your body loosen up, relax your shoulders, and your back. For a moment, remove all the thoughts of your various responsibilities from your mind. For a few moments Leo stopped talking, letting Lily reach the mental state he had described. Now, tell me, if you could do anything you wanted, what would you do? If you could learn anything, what would it be? Don't think about what the world demands from you, about others' expectations. For now, simply tell me, in your heart, with all the distractions gone, what do you want? Leo's voice echoed in Lily's mind, as if hypnotizing her. But contrary to what Leo said, she was unable to let go of her worries. One by one, all the important moments in her life flashed in her mind. And as they flashed through her mind, it wasn't all the pain, the struggle, the fighting that affected her. It was the loss of her settlement that sat heaviest in her mind. Watching the people she had protected die one by one, unable to do anything else. Making the difficult decision to move, and look for safety elsewhere. Letting all her trusted soldiers go, one by one, on suicide missions to protect her caravan, and when the number of soldiers finally dwindled, ordering her own brother to sacrifice himself to protect the caravan. And after all that, when they finally found salvation under the protection of the Empire, losing all of her followers in a few days. She could not blame them for wanting a better life. But when they ultimately all left her, despite all her sacrifices to protect them, they left her feeling hollow. It was the most painful day of her life. But she was not dragged down by the pain, or the memory of it. Weak-minded people, people who could not endure pain to grow stronger, were the first ones to die in the zombie apocalypse. The pain only made her feel one thing, the desire to grow stronger. To be better. No, not better. To be the best. I want to be the best leader. To be able to lead my followers through rain and drought, through war and terror, and come out only stronger, not weaker. The conviction in her voice was strong and moved Leo. He understood immediately what the woman was saying. She wanted to play a colony management game. Great, now let me get you started, Leo said, as he searched for a very specific game and turned it on. Chapter 103 Filthy Human. Leo did not even need to browse through the list, he directly searched Brimworld and started the game. While he turned the game on in one screen, he opened some tutorial videos on another screen next to her. I suggest you go through the tutorial once before starting a colony, but if you're not able to understand the mechanics thoroughly or get confused, you can watch the videos on the other screen. Lily nodded and after quickly understanding the role of the mouse and keyboard began her journey. The price for playing games at the Gamer's Den was only 1 MP per day, so Lex directly paid the amount for their first experience himself. Then he turned his attention towards Chen, who was silently looking at Lily. Only he had some idea of the pain his sister endured, but it was not the way of the survivors of Vegas Minima to point it out. She was not weak, and did not need his pity. The best thing he could do for her was grow stronger himself. Chen looked directly at Leo and said, I don't need anything like my sister. I just need to get acquainted with my own strength. I recently raised my cultivation and I still feel like I'm not using my strength to the best of my capabilities. Hearing Chen's request, Leo frowned a bit. Clearly Chen wanted to play a game that included physical movement, so VR could work for that. But it would not allow him to use his strength and experiment freely. The best thing for that would be going to the training room. But while fighting dummies was challenging, Leo felt that it still didn't provide the immersion and nuances that a game provided with. Training would always only feel like training, and would not provide the weight and tension of a real combat situation that games could build using rich environments and timely music cues. If only he could integrate the training room dummies with his Gamer's Den. Wait. Leo's eyes lit up. Why couldn't he do that? Mary had told him that he should find loopholes in the system to get the result he wanted. The training room was strictly a system-provided service and could not be changed by him, but the Gamer's Den was created by him directly using the host interface. So why was he limited to having a regular gaming setup? He could make it as advanced or different as he wanted so long as he had enough MP. Opening the midnight market in his mind, he searched for training dummies or robots with high strength and durability. He didn't want to use an AI staff since he was treating them like real people. He found one, a permanent training robot that could be programmed at initial Foundation realm for 35,000 MP. This price seemed like a lot when considering he got 260 guards for 450,000 MP, all of them at higher cultivation levels. That came out to be around 1730 MP per guard. But those guards were temporary, and would disappear once the event period ended. The training robot was permanent. Or at least until it was damaged. Please, follow me, Leo said casually, leading Chen upstairs to the VR rooms. The entire top floor was divided into only 3 VR rooms, so there was plenty of space for Chen to move around and fight in there. But to do what Leo had in mind, he would still need some new additions, so he spent 3,000 MP renovating the rooms and reinforcing them. This would no longer be only a VR room, but also an augmented reality, AR, room. The training robot was waiting at the opposite end of the room, but Leo didn't address it yet. He set the room to the theme of a game called Immortal Kombat, and suddenly the appearance of the room changed. It looked like they were standing in the remains of a difficult battle, with debris and corpses everywhere. Music started playing in the background, and though at first Chen thought it was strange, he quickly realized that the music fit the atmosphere well. The appearance of the training dummy changed as well, and he looked like a demon garbed in yellow clothing. His movement and combat style was adapted to a specific character from the game. You can change the difficulty by saying easy, regular, or hard before you start the fight. If you get too used to the combat, you can also change the enemy combat style by selecting the enemy you want to face. All you need to do is say menu to open up the character selection panel. Furthermore, you won't be fighting to defeat the enemy. Both you and the enemy will have a health bar above your heads. If your health bar runs out, it will automatically be considered your loss. Similarly, if the enemy's health bar runs out, it will be considered your win. Please, enjoy. Leo left Chen to explore his newest installed feature. For the AR segment he was planning on charging more, maybe around 200 MP a day, but for now he wouldn't charge Chen. He had to get them hooked first. Leo chuckled as he went downstairs. Lily was already engrossed in the game in the few minutes she'd been playing, and wore an extremely serious face as she navigated the obstacles. Keep an eye on the guests. If they need anything, make sure to help them out, alright? The boy nodded firmly before returning to watch some more anime. Leo didn't know which one he was watching, but it occurred to him the boy was watching multiple anime concurrently. Somehow, that just seemed wrong. But traumatized by the thought that he may be acting like his parents, Leo said nothing and returned to his residence. He scanned the inn once again to check everyone's location, but no one was walking around. Alexander and Helen were still at Battle Axe, and Will and Hera were in their courtyard having a meeting. He waited for a while for someone to become accessible for him to trap, but after a while he got tired. Instead of waiting, he decided to meditate and check up on everyone once he was done. A few hours went by, and as the sun set, the inn looked beautiful under the warm, yellow light of all the sky lanterns. Lex just finished a round of meditation and immediately scanned the inn just in time to catch Lily and Chen walking towards the manor, both seriously discussing their experience at the Gamers Denver. What surprised him was that Alexander and Helen were sitting in the restaurant in the manor, and so were Will, Hera and Jimmy. Aisha was also sitting in the corner, looking tired, and maybe sad. He realized that almost all of his guests would soon be gathered in the restaurant in the manor. If he appeared as the bartender, casually wiping the bar with a cloth, he could recreate the perfect mental image of what he imagined an inn was like the first time he thought of the inn. Of course, he was not about to wipe the bar, but he changed into his host attire and teleported to the restaurant. Alexander and Helen were having burgers, Aisha was wallowing over a large plate of fries, Jimmy was having dinosaur-shaped nuggets, his mother was only having a cup of coffee and Will having a cup of mint green tea. The food items weren't exactly what Lex envisioned when he thought of food served at an inn, but who cared? Lily and Chen sat down in a corner and ordered 2 steaks, 2 salads and a lot of fruit. They weren't picky eaters but understood better than everyone else here the importance of nutrition. Even Foundation realm cultivators hadn't gotten rid of their dependence on food, and improper nutrition not only affected their health and combat performance, it affected cultivation as well. Not eating properly was a mistake they would never make. Lex enjoyed the pleasant atmosphere. Everyone was gathered together in the same room, and though they kept to themselves, their general presence created a merry environment. A short while later, Slag also joined in. He was not completely healed, but he was healed enough that he gave priority to his mission of reconnaissance. The room went silent for a second when he entered, as everyone turned to look at the new guest, but they all quickly resumed their own conversations. Lily and Chen recognized his uniform and started whispering to one another, trying to not attract his attention. Slag came and sat at the bar, directly opposite to Lex. Would you happen to have a nutritional supplement drink? Yes, but wouldn't you rather prefer a fruit juice or something? It doesn't sound very appealing. Slag shook his head, indicating he was fine with choice in drink, then turned around to look at all the guests in the room. So these guests are all from Minima Vegas? I cannot share the private details of our guests. But in general, we accept guests from all over the universe, so naturally Minima Vegas is included. Entire universe? Schlag repeated, confused. How do they get here? Using our keys, naturally. Or they encounter the golden door, the same way you did. Either way, everyone is teleported here directly. Slag frowned, but said nothing. Teleportation, even across a solar system, was very costly. He could not fathom what it would require to have teleportation on such a large scale. While they were talking, Lex felt another guest entering the inn, but since he was in the middle of a conversation with Slag, he mentally told Gerard to greet the guest once he made sure it wasn't a zombie. But only a few seconds later a loud roar reverberated through the manor, "Kneel, you filthy human." Chapter 104 Useless Scrub. The conversations in the restaurant hushed. All the guests looked at each other, then turned to look at the innkeeper who stood behind the bar. "Excuse me for a moment," the innkeeper said to Slag calmly, as if he was in no hurry, but then disappeared from his place. The resident teenagers, namely Alexander, Helen and Aisha, rushed to the window to peek at what was happening outside. After a few moments, the rest joined them. Outside, a pale and trembling Gerard stood before an 8-feet-tall beast that looked something akin to a liger. Its whiskers were thick and long, waving in the air with ferocity. Its feline eyes stared angrily at the human before it, its fangs exposed threateningly. Lex quickly looked at its status. Name, Useless Scrub. Age, 432. Sex, male. Cultivation details, doesn't matter. Species, dead meat. Midnight and prestige level, no. Remarks, those who disrespect the inn do not deserve to live. If Lex wasn't in such a serious situation, he would have chuckled. The system was clearly pissed. What seems to be the issue here? Lex asked calmly. He thought that as the great and noble innkeeper, he needed to handle the situation maturely and... Another cretin. How dare you stand while in my prescience, the liger roared. Its anger lit its fur in a blue flame, causing the air to ripple from the heat. Calm down, you are dash. Lex's speech was cut short by the liger roaring in anger and smashing its paw towards him. Its claws extended out, covered in blue flames as well. Yet before the claw could even reach near Lex, it was stopped mid-air by a hand. The hand did not belong to Lex's bodyguard, who would have simply disintegrated the liger, but one of the 10 security guards above the nascent realm that Lex hand rented for the midnight games. The liger tried to pull back its hand, but realized it could not. Sensing that the situation may be getting out of hand, the liger tried to retreat, but discovered that its entire body was frozen solid by an extremely domineering aura. It could not move, it could not speak, and it could not even initialize its spirit energy anymore. Looking at the liger, Lex frowned. Screw maturity, now Lex was pissed. But he did not want to kill the liger directly, the way the liger had tried to do to him. No, he was not so easily satisfied. Even if he knew his emotions were running amok, this time he did not try to control them. Sometimes, it was better to let himself feel whatever it was he was feeling. Silently Lex spent 2,500 MP, then looked at the guard and said, I've created a detention room in the greenhouse. Take this, well, it's no longer a guest, so take this deviant and hold him in the detention room. I will join you shortly. The guard nodded with an emotionless face and effortlessly used his spiritual sense and carried it in the air behind him as he casually walked towards the greenhouse. How are you feeling, are you okay? Lex asked, looking at Gerard. The old man was still trembling, but he tried to put on a brave face. I'm good, sir, thank you for asking. Go to the recovery room and have Nurse Jubilation check you out. Then take a rest, you've earned some time off. Thank you, sir, Gerard replied, and teleported away. Lex looked back at his guests who were peeking from the window and smiled at them, then disappeared as well. In the forest near the greenhouse, a square building had cropped up. It was gray and had no windows, only a single door in the front. This was the detention room Lex had spent 2,500 MP making. It was small compared to his other buildings such as the gamer's den and the barber shop because Lex didn't need much out of it. It was a small, reinforced and soundproof building where Lex was planning on interrogating the liger, where Lex was planning on interrogating useless scrub. The reason it was near the greenhouse was because he didn't want customers accidentally finding it. Inside the room was simply an incredibly bright room with chains on the far wall, and a chair for Lex to sit in. He waited a few minutes before the guard finally showed up with useless scrub, who now looked incredibly afraid. It had been trying for a long time to get loose, but still could not move. I want to know everything about it. I want to know where it came from, what its background is, what it does, everything, Lex instructed the security guard. While Lex wanted information, that did not mean he was condoning violence or torture. He was angry, not cruel. The security guard was of such a high cultivation level, if he had no methods to extract a truthful confession, then Lex would be disappointed. Even simple intimidation should probably work. Back at the manor, everyone returned to their seats, not at all surprised by the outcome. Yet despite that, the mood in the room was much more serious. The beast that had attacked clearly gave off an aura of a golden core beast. Many of the guests there recognized that. It was the security guard that had most of them confused. He was so immensely powerful but gave off no aura at all. Only Slag saw some signs of what the guard's cultivation level could be, only because of the kind of exposure he had as a lieutenant. He was suddenly very happy that he left the recovery pod early. Well, at least we know the upcoming event will be secure, said Will. He was speaking to Hera, but his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. The man's words immediately caught Slag's attention. The soldier immediately made sure he looked presentable before approaching the old man. Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear. Did you say there's going to be an event here? Do you know what it's about? Slag paused for a moment, before continuing, where are my manners? Let me introduce myself first. Lieutenant Slag of the 7th Forward Battalion of the Jotun Empire, at your service. Slag analyzed the two as he introduced himself. The innkeeper was a different matter, but he was sure he could easily read these two who had a lower cultivation than him. Their lack of reaction at the mention of the Jotun Empire told him they either also had a similarly powerful background or were unaware of the empire. He was more willing to bet on the latter, which only meant one thing. They were from an uncharted part of the universe. That in itself was very important information. My name is Will, said the old man. This is Hera and little Jimmy. Please, have a seat. Slag took a seat at the table with them and carefully analyzed them without making it obvious. Their cultivation levels were pathetically low, that much Slag could tell even without scanning them with his spiritual sense. For now he was avoiding scanning his guests with his spiritual sense as he felt his host might not like that. In around a week's time, the Innkeeper is planning on having an event for the guests of 3 different worlds, namely Earth, Vigus Minima and Nibiru. In 2 days, the Innkeeper will release the details of the event so that interested guests may prepare. There will be a cultural portion of the event, as well as a combat one. Do you know the purpose of the event? He asked, slightly confused. Why would half of it be cultural and half combat? And why was the event targeted towards these 3 planets? What was the Innkeeper trying to achieve? How will it benefit him? Little did he know that Lex's bodyguard was also wondering the exact same thing since he arrived. When Will indicated that he did not know the exact purpose of the Innkeeper, Slag asked, I am not familiar with Earth and Nibiru. Are they a part of some empire? Or alliance? He was hoping to get more information about why these 2 planets would be selected in addition to Vigus Minima, but his question only confused the two. Will and Hera looked at one another, unsure of how to answer. Will was fairly certain that Earth had never contacted any other civilization out in space, so could not join any alliance nor was it under the rule of any empire. The closest thing he could think of was the Morrison family owning. Speaking of the Morrisons, Will looked towards Alexander and Helen who were sitting nearby. Perhaps it was best if they were involved in this conversation as well. Will himself wasn't so sure if he should share information about Earth to begin with. But he also did not want to completely end this conversation as this lieutenant could be a great source of information on other civilizations. I think I know someone else better suited for this conversation. Follow me. The old man got up and walked towards the teenagers. Excuse me, Your Highness, Will said, bowing to Alexander. I was meeting with Lieutenant Slag of the Jotun Empire, who was curious about Earth. I thought perhaps it would be better that you answered his questions. Chapter 105 Painful Decisions. Alexander looked at Will and then Slag. He immediately understood the situation. Foreign civilizations might have ulterior intentions and sharing information about Earth might end up being detrimental. Alexander himself raised the same concern with his grandfather. His grandfather told him that they could stop people for some time, but as more people started frequenting the inn they would not be able to stop people from talking. To paraphrase what he said next, he should use his advantage to glean as much information about others as he could. The actual phrase about stripping and whipping others Alexander didn't want to think about. Please, no need for such formalities, Alexander said to Will, and gestured to them to have a seat. Lieutenant Slag, please have a seat as well. My name is Alexander. The lieutenant saluted Alexander but did not bow. As a proud member of the Jotun Empire he did not need to bow before others, but he was still respectful. This youth seemed to be someone important on Earth and had a very decent cultivation for his age. It was not unprecedented to him, but he would definitely be acknowledged as someone very capable even in the Empire. I am not familiar with the Jotun Empire, so please excuse any lack in my etiquettes, Alexander said, taking the lead in the conversation. Is this your first time at the inn? Instead of asking directly about the Empire, Alexander asked about how much they frequent the inn. This would give the other an opportunity to talk a little about himself and introduce information about the Empire that Alexander could then use to further the conversation. It was quite fortunate that he began the conversation this way, because in Alexander's mind the Empire was perhaps based on a continent, or a planet. It did not even occur to him that it spanned entire galaxies. Haha yes, this is my first time visiting the Midnight Inn. As for etiquette, no need to worry at all, the Empire is quite liberal in such matters. After all, with so many galaxies and cultures under the Empire's control, who can keep track of etiquettes? Since you are not familiar with the Empire, I will give a brief introduction. The Jotun Empire is one of the leading forces in the known universe, with control over various galaxies, and a proud member of the Henali Alliance. We have a proud history of over 400,000 years and have played a vital role in reclaiming numerous worlds from the grasp of demons. Alexander did not show any look of surprise or shock as he heard Slag's introduction, though the same could not be said of Will. Not even considering the matter of whether Alexander actually believed what Slag said, the inn had trained him in the subtle art of not being surprised. It is very impressive to be able to maintain control over so much space, Alexander said after a moment of careful consideration. We on Earth are still gaining control over our solar system. Alexander's answer was vague, but gave Slag enough detail to let him know the background of Earth. From what Slag knew, there were no inhabited planets outside the Vega system in its proximity, and if the Empire hadn't interfered, it could be considered a planet with a weak population. Based on Alexander's explanation, Earth might not be much better than Vigus Minima. In that case, maybe the inn was promoting the growth of weak planets. Suddenly Slag felt enlightened, as if he had gleaned some inner purpose behind the mysterious man's actions. It was not enough to uncover his complete intentions, but it was a start. Tell me, Lieutenant Slag, will your empire be participating in the upcoming event? Alexander asked, waking the man from his reverie. He still did not know if what he claimed was true, but if it was there would be no competition in the combat portion at least. I cannot speculate on the intentions of the Empire, but I see no reason not to. The Innkeeper has been very hospitable and I'm sure whatever he has planned will be worth the effort. Both of them were speaking politely and vaguely, but neither of them were lying. Will, who was good at reading people, could understand the subtleties of what was going on, but did not feel qualified enough to participate. Tell me, young Alexander, have you ever wanted to explore the universe? You seem like a very talented and bright man, and the Empire loves to nurture young talents. If you know, at a glance your routine sure looks like that of a kidnapper, a booming voice interrupted Slag, attracting everyone's attention. A lean and handsome man was sauntering through the restaurant door. Without his truckload worth of muscles Marlowe looked a lot less intimidating, but Slag immediately felt like someone had their hand wrapped around his heart. It was not the feeling of danger, or an impending threat, but the feeling of impending certain death. Slag immediately stood up and readied himself for a fight. Even though his instincts were telling him he could not survive a clash, and his mind was telling him that the Innkeeper would not allow a fight, as a soldier of the Empire he feared no enemy and shied away from no fight. This must be Alexander's protector, Slag thought. He must have assumed I have ulterior motives. Before Slag could rationalize the situation some more Marlowe roared, I'm 100 times more talented than my stupid student. If you want to poach someone, poach me. With that, the man burst into a round of laughter as he came and sat down at the table. Velma, give me food. And lots of it, I haven't eaten in days. What would you like, she asked, appearing beside the former behemoth. Anything. Everything. Bring me different dishes, and bring me lots of them. I'm not used to being so tiny, I feel uncomfortable. I need to put some more meat on my bones. Chef's choice, I understand, she said, before disappearing once again. Turning back to Slag, Marlowe gave a wide grin. He was feeling great today, he had almost fixed the issue with his blood. He came out to celebrate and overheard Slag's introduction. His instincts were telling him Slag was not lying, so he immediately became curious. Earth could no longer satisfy him, he wanted a larger stage. If this so-called Jotun Empire was poaching talents, he would happily volunteer. Now tell me Slag, what do I need to do to explore the universe? Lex was standing silently in the detention room, looking directly at useless scrub. The investigation was much easier than he had anticipated. Faced with a much stronger enemy, the Liger was extremely cooperative. On the question of what planet he was from, the Liger was completely lost. He had no concept of what a planet was. A few more questions later Lex could safely deduce that it was from Nibiru, as previously suspected. It was an overlord and in its territory it treated humans as slaves or servants. He did not completely oppress them, but only because he discovered that too much fear and oppression would only reduce their productivity. Just because he was arrogant did not mean he was stupid. Humans were the best farmers, miners, carpenters and all in all general workers around. It grew up in an environment of the survival of the fittest, and after many years of not only surviving but thriving it became extremely arrogant. Seeing a human standing upright in its prescience the Liger could not tolerate it, as it considered humans beneath it. To be clear, it was not discriminating towards humans specifically. All non-feline animals in its opinions were base creatures. As a ruler, it treated its feline followers extremely well and had created a very intricate society based on promoting its followers' strength. With such a mind and experience, if it had not offended the system and then Lex, the Liger could have greatly benefited from the inn. But its fate would be very different now. Lex's anger had already waned by now. His impulsive desire to have the guard kill the beast had also diminished. Lex looked the beast directly in the eyes as he thought about what to decide. Lex saw intelligence, fear, and confusion. No longer being threatened for his life, Lex thought he would feel guilty if he ordered his death. After all, the situation arose from the beast's ignorance. If he was taught there was a larger world outside the one it knew, and that humans and other animals weren't inherently worse than it, then perhaps the Liger would not react that way in the future. Perhaps, the Liger could be re-educated and reintroduced into its world to bring a larger positive impact. These were the thoughts going through Lex's mind. Or rather, his heart. For in his mind he knew that regardless of the reason, the animal had tried to kill him without a second's hesitation. He could not show mercy to such an animal, now or in the future. So while his heart was still full of reluctance he simply ordered, "Kill it." The guard shot a single ray of spirit energy into the Liger's skull, and it died like the useless scrub the system had named it after. Lex had killed zombies before, and wolves. Both of them were in situations where his life was in danger. This was the first time he was responsible for a death while he himself was not being actively threatened, and while his heart was full of guilt, this was a decision he made with his mind. He could allow himself to feel pain over a difficult decision, but he could not allow himself to get into the habit of making stupid decisions out of guilt. Chapter 106 Shenanigans. Once the liger was dead, Lex told the guard to pass the body to the gardener. The body of a powerful beast would probably serve as a wonderful fertilizer. Lex didn't know the exact details of how to use it, but he didn't doubt that the gardener or turtle knew how to. Once that was done, Lex stayed in the detention room for a few moments longer, looking at where the liger was held. Just as he was about to leave, his bodyguard appeared beside him. "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" the bodyguard asked. His voice was deep and smooth, making it very pleasant to hear. "Go ahead," Lex responded. "Why do you care so much about the beast? Why did it affect you?" The bodyguard was genuinely curious. In his mind, the innkeeper was an existence close to itself, otherwise the bodyguard would have been able to view the innkeeper's cultivation. At their level, a lot of things became irrelevant. So then the bodyguard could not understand why Lex was burdening himself so much by caring, or to be more specific, by having an emotional response to killing an enemy. "I just think it's a pity," Lex said, looking back at where the body of the beast used to be. "It was not a bad leader, and it stumbled upon an immense opportunity by coming here. It could have not only raised its own cultivation but also of all its followers, and exposed them to a much wider horizon than the one they lived with. Yet instead of availing the opportunity, in its arrogance it chose to become my enemy. Even when I tried to give it a second chance, it wasted it." The bodyguard shook his head. What Lex said was true, the liger did waste an amazing opportunity, but he did not understand why Lex cared one way or another about the beast. "It doesn't matter if you understand or not," said Lex, feeling slightly contemplative after the incident. "Your belief or understanding of something only affects how you experience life, nothing else. Whether you believe you are the best, or the strongest, or better than others does not affect the universe at all. It only affects how you perceive the universe around you. And if one day, you encounter someone or something that challenges your belief, how well you can adapt will determine your outcome." The beast believed it was superior to humans, and thus lost the opportunity to better itself using an opportunity provided by humans. Similarly, if you believe that you are the best, you will never surpass your current self since you have already deemed it the best. The bodyguard quietly listened, trying to dissect what Lex had said. He was attempting to see the relevance or purpose behind Lex's actions using this logic. Whether he would be able to succeed or not didn't matter, for Lex only felt like being randomly philosophical. With his emotions vented, Lex put on a wide grin and returned to the manor. He returned to the unusual scene of Marlowe stuffing his face with spaghetti and meatballs with his left hand and arm wrestling Alexander, Helen and Jimmy with his right. A pale and obviously defeated Slag was standing in the corner, observing the situation. Hera was watching with a smile, and she watched her son finally interact with others. Even the previously morose Aisha was standing in the crowd, cheering on the kids. Harry and John had also appeared in the room and seemed to be egging them on. Harry was playing intense music on his phone, as if to set the scene. That made Lex realize he should hire a musician, but he put it at the back of his mind and watched his guests goof off. He did not know how the situation became like this, but he was suddenly tempted to offer Marlowe another job as the resident joker. Just as Marlowe finished his food, his right arm came crashing down, defeating the kids without any suspense. "Who's next?" the now giant wannabe Marlowe screamed as he swapped out the empty plate for a dish of lasagna. Lex felt personally offended when he saw Marlowe eat the lasagna with a spoon. Surprisingly, Chen stood up and sat opposite to Marlowe, replacing the defeated kids. As he grabbed Marlowe's hand, Lily tied a rope around their hands and stood on the side, ready to pull Marlowe's hand down. "I'm going to need some help, who else hasn't gone yet?" Lily asked, looking around the room. Harry raised his hand as he hopped towards Lily and grabbed the rope. He changed the music as well, pumping himself up. At this point no one noticed Lex disappearing, and Leo running into the room. Lex's bodyguard simply lost track of the innkeeper, but did not put it to heart. His job was only to protect the innkeeper while he was in the inn. If he left of his own accord, the bodyguard did not need to be bothered. Leo grabbed onto the rope excitedly as well, asking Harry, "What's going on?" Harry did not react at all to Leo's sudden appearance and said, "The loud guy sealed his body cultivation and challenged everyone to an arm wrestling match. He said he won't use any strength while he eats, but once he finishes you will win the match. The goal is to beat him before he finishes his meal." At this point Chen started trying to push Marlowe's hand down, and the others pulled on the rope. As one of the weakest cultivators there, Lex did not expect his contribution to matter, but he was getting severe FOMO, fear or missing out, just standing there watching. The trio pulled hard on the rope and it seemed for a moment that Marlowe's hand moved down a bit, but no one could be too sure. Only a few moments later Marlowe had finished the lasagna like a vacuum sucking up dirt, and slammed Chen's hand down. Next, he roared, though whether he meant the next meal or arm wrestler, no one could be sure. Velma hopped towards him and put down a plate of fresh barbecue, politely handing him a fork as well. At this point, almost everyone in the room had already lost. Just when everyone thought that no one would step up, one of the suited guards sat opposite to Marlowe. This guard's cultivation was peak golden core, so he was not weak at all. Yet the look Slag gave the guard was one of ridicule. The people in the room cheered as the new match started, and someone started a chant of, "Kick Marlowe's butt." Jimmy was the most vocal with that chant, and stood up on a table to watch the exciting match. Hera almost cried, watching her son enjoying the festivity. Jimmy had been so reclusive the past few months, he was finally behaving like a child again. The guard surprised everyone by putting up a strong fight. Marlowe's hand moved down till it was at a 45 degrees angle, but before he could move it down further Marlowe had devoured his food and started fighting back. Unlike the previous matches, he was not able to simply slam down the guard, which prompted another round of cheering. "You're getting weak, old-timer," Alexander yelled, smirking at his former teacher. As if to answer Alexander, Marlowe started exerting even more strength. His shirt ripped at the bicep and veins started running up his arm. Finally, after a tough fight, the guard was defeated. A round of booing and cheering took place as Marlowe chugged down a jar of mead and slammed it down on the ground. Next, his roar echoed, prompting Velma to reappear with a plate of deep-fried cheese balls, nuggets, sausages and French fries. Marlowe, like a ravenous animal, set upon the plate without waiting for his next opponent. While everyone waited to see if anyone would step up, perhaps another guard, John casually strolled to the table. In a great show of arrogance, instead of clasping Marlowe's hand, he only stuck out a single finger. "Velma, be a dear and get me that drink you offered last time. What was it called, Pina Colorado?" "Pie colada," she said, handing him the drink. John accepted the drink with a smile, and looked at Marlowe. "I'll give you until I finish this glass to defeat me. By the way, all my spirit energy is already sealed so you don't need to worry about that." Marlowe let out a viscous grin and grabbed the man's finger. The match started immediately, but neither the hand nor the finger moved from the middle. The room was full of hooting and chanting, with Leo participating as well. John casually drank his drink while Marlowe hurriedly swallowed his food. The two finished at the same time and after giving each other a dirty look, began using full force. The table cracked immediately, but they continued to wrestle as if the air itself was solid. For exactly 1 second it looked like it would be a tie, but then John smashed his finger down hard, throwing Marlowe's body across the room after a crushing defeat. Marlowe's body hit a window, and though the window did not break, cracks appeared. The whole room exploded in celebration as almost everyone had been defeated by Marlowe. Even Slag let out a smirk. To everyone here, this victory was more dear than if they themselves had won. The celebration, however, was interrupted by the innkeeper's voice giving an announcement in the room saying, "For broken and damaged furniture, Marlowe and John will be fined 300 MP each." Everyone started laughing, Marlowe shrugged it off, but John started scowling. He was the most broke person here. Chapter 107 Assembly. With Marlowe's devastating defeat, the merrymaking and festivities slowly came to a close. Will, Hera and Jimmy eventually returned to their rooms, Jimmy still bouncing up and down from the excitement. Aisha stayed a while longer, but then took a look at her watch and eventually returned. Slag, who no longer wished to associate with anyone in Marlowe's prescience, went out to stroll about the inn and collect more information. Maybe Lex should just make a booklet for new guests so that they don't need to explore themselves. John, whose sense of satisfaction from the victory had been ruined, returned to the battle axe and Harry returned to Earth. Eventually it was just Marlowe, Alexander and Helen left, mainly because Marlowe was still eating like a ravenous wolf. At a certain point Lex realized that he wasn't just being a glutton, his body needed sustenance and since he could no longer absorb spirit energy due to his broken core, food was his primary source. "Would you like to try our spirit food instead of just regular meals?" the innkeeper asked, finally halting the man's actions. Lex reminded himself that despite Marlowe's bombastic actions, the man was a very focused and dedicated individual. Everything he did served a hidden purpose, so he should have realized sooner that he was finally suffering the toll of trying to resolve the issue with his blood without the support of the recovery pod. "Why not? Send them my way," he finally said after swallowing, but then continued to eat the food that he had. Marlowe was the first person trying the spirit food made from the vegetables Lex had grown in the greenhouse. In terms of price, it was still very reasonable, changing the price for a single meal from 1 MP to 10. As much as Lex wanted to watch Marlowe try out the new food, see him discover the brilliance of the inn's cooking that would bring him to a world where champagne flowed from the sky and rose petals appeared beneath his feet. Maybe Lex had spent some time watching a certain cooking anime in the past. He decided to leave. Although he felt well enough, he wanted to meditate some more and calibrate his mood for the upcoming meeting. Today's incident also reminded him that not everyone would go along with his designs willy-nilly, and he needed to be in best form. Back at the manor, with some privacy finally, Alexander turned to Marlowe with a serious matter to discuss. When are you going back to Earth? Your disappearance has caused some issues. Your wife has caused a lot of problems. Even Bluebird finally could not ignore it and sanctioned her, but that has not redeemed the situation. Marlowe did not slow down eating, and it didn't look like he cared much either way, but a careful observer would notice the flashing sadness in his eyes. I cannot leave this place until I finish my new method of cultivation. The meditation room speeds up my progress astronomically, and I might need to go to the recovery room at a moment's notice if something goes wrong. Alexander sat in silence as he contemplated what Marlowe told him. Like his grandfather, all the nascent level cultivators on Earth reached that level through unique and unrepeatable ways. Following that road, Marlowe had devised a new cultivation technique that could be summed up by describing it as rapid evolution under the influence of spirit energy. With his core crippled and no resources to push his body cultivation further, this is the solution he came up with. The rapid evolution would be induced under the influence of spirit energy, but by doing so he would essentially be changing his very body. This change went beyond the scope of change brought about by cultivation, and would bring his body's natural state to be equivalent to higher cultivation levels. This was a theory that Marlowe came up with based on his study of beasts, as they had no problem reaching the nascent realm even when humans could not. What Marlowe did not know was that he had embarked on a path that was already known by some in the universe, but very few tried and even fewer succeeded in, the path of the prime. In fact, without the aid of the inn, Marlowe would never have even made it this far. And how long do you think that will take? Will you be able to join the Midnight Games? I'm not sure, Marlowe replied. I feel like I'm on the verge of success. But like any breakthrough, that last step could come quickly or it could take years. After a moment of silence, well, even if you miss the games, I think you should take some time when you're able to go back and settle things on Earth before they become too ugly. Speaking of things getting ugly, what are the geezers planning on doing about the inn? I don't know if what Slag said was true, but it's only a matter of time before someone sends a tracker or something of the sort back to Earth with a guest who wants to venture out into the universe. Or someone who gets bribed. Or tricked. Either way, the end result will not be good. I asked my grandfather, Alexander said with a confused expression. He only said that I don't need to worry about it, and if possible, accept the biggest bribes. He told me to get the most I can out of anyone who is willing to throw money our way, and then continue to get some more. The room returned to silence, as everyone contemplated the future. Eventually they parted ways, and as Marlowe walked back towards the meditation room his eyes became resolute and a Tier 5 zombie core appeared in his hand. The rest of the day passed peacefully. After a round of meditation, Lex eventually went to bed. For some reason, his meditation was extremely fruitful today. He felt like he was on the verge of stabilizing his spirit. He didn't know if his progress was faster than normal, but since his cultivation technique was unorthodox he simply accepted it. Not that he was complaining, he wanted to become stronger as fast as possible. The next day, Lex held an assembly for all his guards. He was not sure if his guards were very well-designed robots or constructs of the system or real people, like he suspected his bodyguard might be. Either way, instructing them once himself would not be a bad idea. In the forest surrounding the greenhouse 260 guards stood in 10 straight lines, facing the innkeeper. The AI staff was also standing on the side even though Lex could pass orders to them mentally. They didn't want to feel left out. I've been observing you and you've been doing a good job. I can see you patrolling the grounds diligently, and even the quick response to yesterday's event made me proud. Tomorrow we'll be expecting a lot more guests, and with more people I expect there will be more altercations. You have to stop any incidents before any of the guests can get hurt. Should anyone cause an issue, you should only detain them, try not to harm them. Once you've detained them, hold them until you can contact me, no need to be polite against offenders. If the opponent is too strong or attacks with intention to kill, then no need to hold back. You can attack with extreme prejudice. This meeting will be practice for the much larger event in a few days, so make sure to perfect your rounds. Lex did not give them too many instructions, they were doing their job well enough and probably knew what to know better than he did. It was just, he needed to make sure they knew how to handle most situations. He did not want guards killing or crippling any guests, at least on their own discretion. Then he informed them on the protocol for various different situations from medical emergencies to massive zombie invasions to lost children and more. Honestly, he did not expect any such situation to arise, but he had learnt that he could never adequately predict things when it came to the system. When it came to his regular staff, he did not give them many instructions, but instead told them to note down areas where they were lacking that they noticed during the larger crowd. This would be a good time to test the limits of how the inn was running and what things needed to be changed. Finally, he also told them not to overburden themselves, as he had arranged for temp staff for each guest during the event. Before Lex could finish his briefing, Z raised his hand and asked if he could go back to the gamer's den. Lex mentally facebombed, but nodded nonetheless. He needed to find this little boy some friends. That was the only solution. Chapter 108. Lex freakin' Williams. Lex rubbed his forehead with index and middle fingers as he worried about Z. But this was not the time or the place for that. He forced his attention back to the matter at hand and gave the rest of the staff a motivational speech. He needed them to be at their best. With that done, he sent the rest to return to their duties, but told Gerard and Velma to stay back. Something important he realized, only while giving them the speech, was that he had been giving them instructions but never received any feedback from them. Other than when they responded to his requests, he never really talked to his staff. This was not good practice. Even if he did not become friends with them, he should at least know their thoughts in regards to the inn. What do you guys think of the preparations? Do you think there's anything we need to do? He asked them. Since they were his oldest employees, they would have the most insight. The duo looked at each other, confused, then thought about the answer for a moment. You should choose a second in charge to tackle any situation while you're busy. If there are too many guests, waiting till you're free to resolve the issue would take up a lot of time, said Gerard after a moment. That makes sense, Lex replied thoughtfully. After thinking about it for a moment, he said, for now Mary will be second in charge. Since others can't communicate with her, Gerard, you can act as her communicator. Others can come to you with their issues, and then you can communicate her instructions. Very good, sir, Gerard responded with a bow. Anything else? I think having maps would be a good idea, said Velma. All the guests have to walk around themselves if they want to find out about the inn. A map would make it much easier. Excellent, why didn't I think of that? Lex said, surprised by his own obtuseness. He went directly to the midnight market and looked at what options he had. Simple printed maps that would be updated every time he made an addition to the inn would be the cheapest and cost him 10,000 MP total. Once paid, he could have an unlimited amount of such maps. Maps that would pin the user around as they traveled on the map were even more expensive, going directly up to 50,000 MP. There were more sophisticated maps as well, such as digital or holographic maps, but Lex didn't even bother with those at the moment. He directly bought the cheapest option for 10,000 MP. That was a great suggestion. Anything else? The both of them thought for a minute, and could not come up with anything else, so they just shook their heads. Alright, then what about yourselves? How are your work hours? Do you need more rest? What about your residences, are they satisfactory? Do you want anything more? Honestly, Lex felt a little bad as their residences were very bare and without a lot of furniture, and they didn't really do much else other than work or cultivate. It's more than enough, answered Gerard truthfully. Yes, I never even thought about having a place of my own. It's already very great, we don't need anything else. Velma answered with a lot of enthusiasm. Watching their earnest faces and listening to their satisfied responses, Lex felt even more guilty. The simple-minded AI staff were too easily placated. He vowed to himself that the next time he made a lot of MP he would do more for them. With everything done, he sent them off and returned to his own residence. A fact that he didn't want to acknowledge was that he was actually feeling quite a bit nervous. Thinking about speaking to a large crowd consisting of the most powerful people from several planets made his heart jitter, just a little bit. It was not like he'd never given a speech or presentation to a crowd before. He did it often while he was working, but this was an entirely different scale of things. Not to mention, all of them probably had monumentally high cultivation levels, and he was barely a beginner. Even with a cheat such as the system, he felt dwarfed. He didn't want to distract himself from the feeling, however. He had a gut feeling that if he didn't acknowledge it and plan for it, even with the help of the host attire, he'd mess up tomorrow. So he did not shy away from the feeling, nor did he go to meditate. He let himself feel the nervousness for a while. He felt his gut plummeting, his muscles tightening up, nerves jittering. He felt his bones tremble. He felt his hairs stand on their ends. He felt the dread setting in. Then, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, holding the air in. When he could hold it in no longer, he released his breath slowly. When he opened his eyes, despite his anxiety and apprehension, they were filled with conviction. Fear would not stop him, anxiety would not deter him, and the unknown would not slow his steps. His audience for tomorrow might consist of the leaders of 3 different planets, but he was Lex freaking Williams, the goddamn innkeeper. They should be the ones nervous in his presence, not the other way around. He went back to his study and prepared all his talking points. He did not write a speech, but jotted down a list of all the important things he needed to discuss. He wrote down all the rules for the events and repeated them in his mind multiple times, so that he would not forget to inform them. He imagined questions others would ask, and jotted down potential answers. He thought of various scenarios he could encounter tomorrow, and prepared his responses. He visualized himself on stage, and thought about how exactly he needed to speak. He thought about his body language and gestures. Most of the time, Lex was a pretty relaxed fellow. Even though he had decided to keep his persona as the innkeeper mysterious, he could not help himself from chatting and occasionally joking with his guests because it was hard to act as someone he wasn't. But tomorrow, even if he maintained his relaxed demeanor, he could not allow others to take him lightly. As he prepared for the following day and imagined the various scenarios, his nervousness did not actually fade. The bottomless feeling in his gut remained with him, and occasionally he even felt randomly cold, but he let none of that deter his actions. As a result, something unexpected happened. Through working amidst difficulty, he honed his spirit faster and better than during any meditation session. By the time night fell, his spirit completely stabilized and he was ready for the next procedure. Lex felt as if his spirit made a pop sound, and suddenly the world became much clearer. It was as if previously he had been trudging through mud, exerting all his strength with each step he took, but now suddenly he had been freed to walk freely. No, it did not feel like he was walking freely, but that he was walking along a travelator that was going in the same direction. He did not need Mary to tell him what had happened, he realized on his own. But right now was not the time to undergo a procedure and raise his cultivation. He would have to wait until after the meeting. Even though he didn't need to anymore, he got up and went to meditate. He stabilized his thoughts and let his body relax. He did not let his thoughts return to tomorrow's meetings, and completely freed himself of all future worries. Eventually, he reached a mental state equivalent of floating freely in a swimming pool. When he was done, he got up, showered and went directly to bed. The shower was warm and the sleep deep and dreamless. As the innkeeper slept silently, countless people around the universe waited impatiently for the next day to arrive. They did not dare to relax, lest they miss their opportunity. Others were not impatient, but looked at their silver keys with eager attitudes. Others simply didn't care. Some people summoned countless soldiers and guards, with weapons equipped and armors worn. Others called for translators and dignitaries. Others yet collected their best booze and hallucinogens. A specific fellow on Earth prepared his visiting cards, each one handmade with the best calligraphy he could muster. On Nibiru, a sloth lazily opened its eyes. The world seemed to distort under the weight of his vision, so he closed his eyes again. On Vegas Minima, a youth landed on the planet, surrounded by some of the most elite guards of the Empire. He was reading a briefing of the reason he was sent here. The Empire had certain suspicions. As unlikely as they were, some things could not be put to chance, so he was sent. Somewhere in a realm known as Garvitz, a small gathering of elite demons was gathered. Surprisingly, all of them looked like humans. Well, mostly human. An occasional pair of horns or wings and such were still visible. They were oddly disciplined, and stood according to rank and position. At the forefront sat a pure-blooded devil. His smirk was remarkably enchanting and his eyes full of mischief. Back at the inn, as the sun rose, the innkeeper opened his eyes. Chapter 109 Respect. Lex did not wake up groggy, nor was it a slow process. The moment his eyes opened he was wide awake, fully aware that today was the day he had been preparing for. He got up, showered and put on his suit. But he did not leave his residence, he simply scanned the inn. His guards were already patrolling the grounds and all his staff was in place. Even Harry, who originally had a commitment back on Earth today, was here. It was around 8:20 a.m. right now, and the keys would activate at 9 a.m. He did not select his targets individually, that would have cost too much MP, but set a general criteria of leadership of an adequate number of living beings. Then he chose to launch 300 silver keys per planet. Each key would allow the main guest to bring up to 2 other guests, so at minimum he was expecting 300 guests per planet and at most 900. This was not including the few random guests who already had golden keys. So if each guest brought along 2 colleagues or guards, he could have up to 2,700 guests here today. 2,700 guests who were all at a much higher cultivation level than him. Suddenly, he stopped himself. His thoughts were spiraling again. He closed his eyes and regulated his breathing. He was not in a meditative state, as he still kept an eye on the inn, but he had a strict control over his wandering thoughts. Time ticked by slowly, and as soon as it was 9 a.m., Lex exhaled slowly, then opened his eyes. Right now, he was no longer a young man who had made a simple wish for excitement in his life. Right now, he was the innkeeper. His heart no longer beat irregularly and his nerves no longer tingled him. He had no distracting thoughts. Normally, the host attire helped him keep composure, but it did little in the way of elevating his mind and body language. Yet now, not only was he composed, even with his casual smile his demeanor demanded the utmost respect. Lex had somehow entered a state of total concentration, similar to what he had so long ago when he was fighting zombies. Every thought, every nerve, every instinct was honed on the mission he had set for himself. The first portal finally opened, and out stepped a massive, 9-foot-tall wolf with green fur. Behind it, 2 other canines followed closely. The wolf's followers had black fur, and were in fact much larger than the wolf, at nearly 15 feet, but made sure to stay a step behind the wolf. Lex instantly checked the wolf's status. Name, Bloodfang. Age, 4555. Sex, male. Cultivation details? Too high for host to view. Species, inferior Lycaeos. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Bloodline, inferior Lycaeos/unique variant. Remarks, unsatisfied with its stock in life, the wolf has decided to carve out its own path. A hungry, ambitious and cunning beast like this is excellent prey for price gouging, charge without restraint. Lex was happy that the wolf's status could be viewed, even if he could not tell its cultivation. With back-to-back error warnings lately, he was getting concerned that most high-leveled cultivators would have ways to avoid detection from his system scan. Yet even as he scanned Bloodfang, Lex made no move to greet it. There was no way he could individually greet all guests, so he would greet none of them. Instead, the personal hologram staff that he hired was responsible for the greeting. A holographic wolf appeared before Bloodfang, though its size was nowhere near that of Bloodfang and its entourage. It was sized according to a normal wolf on Earth. Greetings guests, and welcome to the Midnight Inn, the best inn that caters to the entire universe. The hologram said. I am your personal hologram, there to assist you with anything you need and answer all of your questions. The meeting will begin shortly. Would you like me to take you to the Colosseum, where the meeting will be held, or would you like a tour first? The wolf stared silently at the hologram, and Lex stared silently at the wolf. He hoped the wolf would not do anything drastic, but if it did his guards were there to resolve the situation. As he could not see their cultivation levels, he was not sure if his guards could handle it, but if they couldn't he would step in personally and his bodyguard would be forced to intervene. Lex had every confidence in his bodyguard that cost him a ridiculous amount of money. Just as the wolf was about to speak, another portal opened nearby. A massive, 98-foot-tall gorilla stepped through. After sweeping the area for immediate threats or traps, the gorilla stepped aside and allowed a deer to enter. The deer was not only normal-sized, it actually looked petite, yet the obvious deference of the giant gorilla spoke volumes of its status. The deer was followed by a stag. Green's Haven, Bloodfang called out to the deer, and gave it an acknowledging nod. Good to see you, Bloodfang, the deer responded casually, and took a look around. A holographic deer appeared before Green's Haven, and repeated the exact line that had been said to Bloodfang. This is so interesting, the deer said to the stag. It's like a picture, but it has a spirit. Tell me spirit, what do you mean by universe? The landmass on which you live is known as a planet, and exists in space. It revolves around your sun, along with a collection of other planets although not all of them may contain life. This collection of planets that revolve around a sun form a cohesive system called a solar system. A galaxy is formed of millions or billions of solar systems, and there are billions of galaxies. The space which these galaxies exist in, and more, is known as the universe. Nonsense. Bloodfang roared angrily. Nothing that big can exist. What lies are you spouting? What is your purpose? The holograms were not affected, but the guards surrounding them suddenly became alert. Fortunately, that seemed to have an effect as both the deer and wolf felt the intimidation of the 10 guards with unknown cultivations. Now, Bloodfang, no need to be so closed-minded. Don't tell me you can't feel that the spiritual energy of this place is different from our planet. This at least proves that there are lands other than ours, far away from our reach. The wolf reluctantly nodded. Before they could continue their conversation, more portals opened and new beasts started emerging from them. It seemed that Nibiru was the first planet to be connected, as only beasts were coming through the portal. Fortunately, the beasts that were coming out now were mostly at the Golden Core realm, with an occasional nascent realm one. Lex was slightly concerned that if all of them were at the unknown level his 10 measly guards would not be enough to maintain the peace. And the peace definitely needed to be maintained, as only a few minutes after beasts started emerging through, 2 enemy beasts identified each other. The first one did not look like any animal Lex knew. It stood on 6 legs with a massive hairy torso connecting them. Instead of hands or claws it had wings and tentacles, and on its 3 heads it had horns, tusks and protruding fangs respectively. The other animal was a fairly ordinary-looking fox. Yet their encounter was anything but ordinary. The two beasts did not seem to care that they were surrounded by other beasts and immediately launched an assault, along with the guards they brought along. The 6 beasts had a single exchange that caused shockwaves to spread throughout the inn. The few guests who still did not know that beasts had made an appearance, namely, Alexander, Will and Chen's parties, instantly woke up from the noise. The fight had only begun and the beasts were already launching their next attacks when they were all suppressed by a massive force. All 6 animals were sprawled on the ground, unable to move and barely able to breathe under the suppressive force. Confusion and fear filled their eyes, as they had never been suppressed so completely since they had started their reign. The other beasts that surrounded them that were previously enjoying the show all took a few steps back, afraid to become involved. "No free fighting is allowed on the inn premises," a voice boomed through the inn. It was Lex's voice, firmly laying down the law. "Guests who wish to engage in combat may request to go to the combat arena, but due to today's occasion the combat arena is not available." Well, also because Lex hadn't made a combat arena at all, but that was an irrelevant detail. "This is your first and only warning. Anyone who engages in a fight, or tries to harm other guests will be strictly punished, and banned from the inn." With that announcement concluded and the force suppressing the 6 beasts disappeared, yet they were too afraid to stand up. The force had been the combined effort of all 10 guards above the nascent realm, suppressing these beasts with their spiritual force. It was not something lightly endured, and probably left mental trauma in the victims, not to mention the physical trauma they experienced being squeezed into the ground. This was something Lex had expected, and already instructed the guards on how to react. This was the Midnight Inn, a place people came to rest and relax, but also a place that must be respected. Chapter 110 Happy Sloth. For a moment the crowd hushed as everyone whispered to one another. They waited for a while, but when nothing else happened the beasts finally relaxed. The beasts slowly formed into small clusters, gathering with those they knew and were on good terms with. They whispered amongst themselves, discussing what they thought was happening. Some of them were gravely intimidated by the 6 beasts getting suppressed, as they themselves were weaker than them. Others smugly gloated over their stupidity. A very few of them silently observed the gathering. In the history of Nibiru there had never been an incident where so many top-tiered cultivators gathered together. This was not only because the planet was divided into multiple continents that were kept apart by the ocean, it was also because beasts were generally territorial. This meant that not only would they stay in their own lands to protect them if other powerful beasts entered their territory, even if only to travel, they would view it with hostility. Eventually the clusters started breaking apart, as some of the beasts headed towards the Colosseum while others roamed about to explore the inn. Noticing this, and realizing the variable sizes of the beasts, Lex quickly opened the event management panel and quickly rented the size regulator for 20,000 MP. With this, once any beast tries to approach any building their size would automatically be reduced to a maximum of 7 feet without affecting their strength of abilities. This feature was actually quite expensive to buy, fortunately to rent for a single event it was relatively cheap. This left Lex with 125,106 MP in total. This was cutting his budget a little close, as he wanted to spend a lot of souvenirs for his new guests to buy. Basic souvenirs would be cheap, less than 10,000 MP for enough to last the whole event in fact, but Lex wanted ones that had some use or ability. After a moment's consideration, Lex decided to take a risk. He wanted to save MP in case of emergencies, but retail was an excellent way to earn back some of what he spent. Lex spent 50,000 MP to purchase commemorative golden coins. On one side of the coin was an image of the Midnight Manor, with the initials MI on it. On the other side was a giant number 1. The initials as well as the number weren't written in English, but were written using a special crafting technique so that they would change so that whoever viewed the coin would always see and understand those initials and number. The coin served no purpose, but simply acted as a commemorative souvenir to celebrate the first ever Midnight Games. Another thing to note, the coin was golden in color but was not made of actual gold. It was made from a much tougher, much rarer metal and more durable metal. The engravings would not fade as a result of time and the coin was extremely resistant to any kind of damage. Maybe, after a long time once the inn became more popular, these coins would be worth a lot to collectors. Each coin could be purchased for 500 MP, from either the gift shop or through the assistants, for now. If he made enough MP and he could add more stuff to sell, he would place stalls near the Colosseum. Lex had stopped viewing the statuses for his guests as they were just too many coming in now. There were already over 500 beasts, and more coming. Alexander, Helen, Will, Hera, Jimmy, Chen and Lily all watched the gathering from the lobby of Midnight Manor. Even knowing that the inn would protect them, looking at the massive beasts roaming around some of them felt intimidated. Since Lex had stopped viewing statuses, he missed out on a single sloth that stood alone in the crowd. It had no followers, and no one interacted with it. The sloth simply stood amongst the crowd, looking around with interest. The world did not seem to distort under its gaze, and even if it moved around the ground would not crack. A small, innocent smile grew out on the sloth's face. Slowly as it could physically manage, the sloth moved a single claw on its foot and its position changed. The sloth was no longer in the crowd, but in a strange little building. It looked at a human who had been startled by its appearance, and its smile grew even wider. The human did not die under its gaze. The rules of this world protected the human. The human, who finally gathered himself, smiled and said, "Welcome to Harry's barber shop. Would you like a makeover?" To be clear, the rules of the inn weren't protecting Harry from an attack by the sloth. The sloth naturally released an aura that was harmful to those around it if they were not of a certain cultivation level. Since this was not an active act, the system deemed it acceptable to curb the aura so that others would not be affected by it. This was similar to how Chen and Blaine were unaffected by Phallic's natural aura when they were talking to him, whereas should they have tried on Earth without Phallic actively withdrawing his aura, they would have immediately died. The difference here was that the sloth was incapable of withdrawing its aura. "Go ahead," the sloth answered, amused by the human. "Please, take a seat," Harry instructed as he turned the chair for the sloth. He had no idea of the sloth's cultivation and normally should not know how to groom a beast. But his sorcery heritage was extremely thorough, and the species of his target was irrelevant as he was not grooming the physical body, but the soul and spirit directly. The physical changes that appeared after his grooming were an indirect result of that. Once the sloth was seated, Harry's eyes started to glow purple again and a pair of flying scissors appeared beside him. After careful consideration of what to do, Harry proceeded to cut the sloth's hair. That is when something unexpected happened. After a single cut, Harry collapsed on the floor, fainting due to exhaustion. The scissors that he used had also snapped. On the sloth's body, the top 1 millimeter of a single hair had changed color from its natural light brown to a much deeper brown. The sloth was not alarmed by this, but in fact marveled at the change it felt in its single hair. It was the most pleasant sensation it had felt in a long, long time. A holographic sloth appeared before it and said, "Don't forget to pay when you leave. You can pay me directly, and I will transfer the money." The sloth smiled and summoned a single, glowing spirit stone. "Keep the change and tip the little human. I enjoyed the makeover very much." The spirit stone disappeared from its hand, along with the hologram. The sloth was now very curious about the inn. It moved another claw and suddenly appeared in a forest. Once it entered, the sloth got completely lost and was unable to exit at all. Eventually it decided to climb one of the trees and take a nap. Someone would wake it up once the meeting started. As Lex was overlooking his some 700+ guests, Mary informed him that Harry had collapsed due to overconsumption of his soul power, and Mary had transferred him to the recovery room. Harry would fully recover, but it was unlikely that he would wake up today. After making sure that Harry had not been attacked, Lex turned his attention back to his guests. Despite his earlier warning, the newer beasts who entered had no prior knowledge of it, and so a few more fights broke out. Fortunately, all the fights were handled quickly and safely, without anyone getting hurt. Since none of the offenders were repeat offenders, Lex could not ban them from the inn for violating his rules since they did not know them. To fix this issue, he made a little change. He arranged his 10 most powerful guards, who he had decided to call his Tier 7 guards since he did not know their cultivation level, at the entrance and had them blast their spirit senses in full. All new guests would undergo a single, quick wave of pressure from his guards before a hologram would appear and tell them the no combat rule of the inn. This seemed to solve the issue. As for why the guards were called Tier 7? He numbered it according to the cultivation realm. Mortals was Tier 1, body tempering was Tier 2, chi training was Tier 3, foundation was Tier 4, golden core was Tier 5, nascent was Tier 6 and the unknown was Tier 7. This division also intimidated Lex a bit. He never thought about it, so he never realized how far he really was in terms of cultivation levels, but dividing it in terms of numbers made it a lot more obvious. Yet he put that thought out of his mind. Just because he was not there yet did not mean he would not get there eventually. His focus returned to the inn. It had been exactly 3 minutes since a new beast entered the inn, and at a total of 798 beasts, it seemed that would most likely be all the guests he would get from Nibiru. Soon, guests from Earth would start to arrive. Having humans and beasts mixed together might cause some problems initially, so he needed to be focused to solve them. Speaking of which, Bloodfang had just made its way to the Midnight Manor and was about to encounter his other guests. He silently transferred some guards nearby to handle any potential issues. Chapter 111 Not a Coward. A holographic wolf was giving Bloodfang a tour and was leading it to the Midnight Manor when it halted in its steps. It saw humans standing in the building, looking out at it. These humans were clearly different from the so-called guards. It suspected that they were also guests. Truth be told, Bloodfang has great trouble adjusting to the fact that these humans were so powerful. On its planet they were nothing more than insects. In fact, since insects could also cultivate, calling them insects was a compliment. They were simply humans, the name an insult unto itself. Yet now in this mysterious place it encountered countless humans who were ridiculously strong, some even stronger than itself. This enraged Bloodfang, yet it dared not do anything lest he upset its host. Bloodfang firmly decided to vent his anger on the humans back on its own planet once it returned. For now, it would adapt. As the wolf walked towards the manor it felt its height shrink, until it was no more than 7 feet. Even its guards were suppressed to 7 feet, though nothing else seemed to change. This made Bloodfang uncomfortable, but it understood that the buildings here weren't designed for beasts and thus some changes were needed. "Greetings, humans," Bloodfang said in a low, throaty voice. Perhaps it tried to be friendly, but his voice was too full of disdain. Yet none of the humans reacted to it. The beast was clearly extremely powerful, and had a right to be disdainful towards them. "Greetings, sir," Alexander responded with a slight, respectful bow. "You must be from the planet called Nibiru, I assume. I look forward to your participation in the Midnight Games." "Yes, the planet Nibiru," the wolf responded. It was still struggling with the concept of a planet and had never heard the name Nibiru before, but how could it say that to a measly human? "What planet do you humans come from?" "We come from Earth," Alexander said simply. "And we come from Vigus Minima," replied Lily. 2 different planets, the wolf contemplated. It had difficult accepting this new change, but it considered the possibility. Should such planets exist, its path would open exponentially. It only needed to find a planet with weaker beings and conquer it. The wolf was on a journey to replace the bloodline it was born with one of its own design. Such an endeavor required countless resources, but the wolf only had a limited supply in its territory. It could not expand further because it controlled an entire continent, albeit a small one, and could not venture out to the sea. Not to mention, the deer had strongly threatened it. Should the wolf start a senseless massacre, the deer would not sit still. How could the wolf conquer more land without exhibiting its might? Yet the deer was stronger, so the wolf had to obey. The exchange ended there. The wolf said nothing more, and the humans did not question it. The hologram continued to give the tour, and Bloodfang continued to follow it. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief that there was no conflict, and everyone mentally prepared themselves for more such encounters in the future. Lex simply accepted it. Even if there was a conflict, he could handle it. Everything was in his control. 10 minutes had passed since the last portal opened, bringing a beast, when finally new portals started opening. They did not open one by one, but simultaneously, as if they had been orchestrated as such. Dozens of humans stepped forth, entering the inn for the first time. These humans had a much lower cultivation compared to the beasts, mostly belonging to the late Foundation realm, with 1 or 2 golden core cultivators here and there. Yet even so, with prior experience the guards took no risk, and a wave of spiritual force passed over all of them before a hologram appeared in front of each guest, welcoming them and giving them instructions about fighting. Lex kept an eye on the people from Earth to see if he recognized anyone. Most of the people were strangers, but he managed to see a few familiar faces belonging to popular Tempest profiles. If it could be said that the beasts from Nibiru had him on guard, the people from Earth only provided him with entertainment. Firstly, everyone was dressed strangely. He expected a lot of suits, but it seemed everyone wore very traditional attire. It seemed that Lex still didn't fully understand the cultivation culture of Earth. He saw everything from kimonos to plated armors to quilts to skirts to this one particular hairy lad who was wearing uncomfortably short shorts. As in, Lex had never seen a man wear such short shorts. Who the hell was he and how did he get here? Lex decided to look away. He wanted to forget the image the very next moment. The next thing that amused me was that the humans did not realize that they could communicate without utilizing their spirit sense. This caused a small verbal argument when an Estonian man passed a comment on an Arabic woman to one of his followers. Almost the entire crowd surrounding him froze when they realized they could understand him. This was followed by a very aggressive argument that would no doubt have turned into a fight had they been anywhere else other than the inn. In the Estonian man's defense, he was only admiring her thick mustache. Fortunately, the embarrassment the humans were causing themselves was lost on all the beasts, otherwise Lex would have been ashamed to associate with Earthlings. A few moments later, more leaders arrived and the situation finally took a more formal tone. This was because, amongst the newest arrivals was the Queen. The one true monarch widely recognized on Earth. Of course, although recognition did not mean approval, as there were a few people who gave her frustrated looks. But that was the extent of what they did. Who had the guts to go against her? Even Lex recognized her, and was surprised to realize that it never occurred to him that she was a cultivator. While Lex was undergoing his own epiphany, the Queen and her followers were undergoing a realization of their own. Brandon's claims about being able to cultivate here were real. This was groundbreaking news. This would drastically affect the power dynamics of Earth. They had to be sure to maintain their lead in utilizing this new resource over the rest of Earth. "You may begin the tour," the Queen said to her hologram, ignoring the crowd of beasts staring at them from a distance. Even though they were powerful, the humans from Earth had never been afraid of beasts. On Earth it was early morning, and all seemed normal. Everyone was going about their day, no one realizing that some of the top leadership on all of Earth had almost simultaneously disappeared. Well, almost no one. After waiting 30 minutes and ensuring that enough time had passed, in a bunker under the Sahara a meeting was started. "We have official confirmation, wherever they have gone they do not have access to communication. Immediately begin the operation," said a hoarse voice. "Begin moving all units into place. However, only move the units into place. No one, I repeat, no one is to start any action right now. Establish reconnaissance on the 5 families and start repositioning troops worldwide. Make sure everything looks official and there are no loopholes. This opportunity is too good to miss." All the members of the meeting turned off their holograms and began taking actions personally. This opportunity was heaven sent, they could not mess this up. Troops started to be repositioned all over Earth, under the guise of drills, or practice, or some reassignment. Various companies started relocating valuable resources, many banks raised their interest rates on loans, various currencies strengthened and many others weakened. No pattern or correlation could be seen between these seemingly separate incidents. Only very few people knew what they signified. One of those people was a soldier, following his troops' repositioning. Only, these troops weren't on Earth, they were on the moon. A few hours after leaving their original base, they arrived at an underground base full of various kinds of jets and ships. Under orders from their superiors, some of the soldiers started climbing into the ships. Others started loading supplies. The only soldier here who knew what was actually happening stood quietly as he waited his turn to board a ship. His actions seemed completely normal, and no one could tell something was amiss, so it was fortunate that he was wearing a helmet that covered his face, otherwise someone would see the nervous eyes of a teenager. Even as he climbed onto the ship and the doors closed behind him, he said or did nothing suspicious. But in his mind, he only hoped that what he was doing would redeem him, and that he lived long enough to go back and tell his friend Alexander that he, Zeus Leventis, was not a coward. As the ship lifted off, Zeus' knees trembled. Well, he was mostly not a coward. Chapter 112 Underwear Models. Unaware of the silent changes happening on Earth, the leaders of the various factions on Earth began to tour the inn guided by their holograms. All of the leaders had already been identified by the 5 families in the days leading up to the meeting, and had been given a non-interference order. They could do as they wished as individuals, but only the 5 families would represent Earth and make appropriate decisions. This may seem like bullying, but the fact that they were allowed to come to such a place at all was generous in the eyes of the 5 families. Besides, as Brandon put it, "I'm a bully, what can you do about it?" The answer was nothing. They could do nothing about it, so they all accepted. So they all simply toured the place. Honestly, even if there was nothing here and it was a barren land, just based on the premise that it could aid their cultivation, they would consider it a holy land. Yet even as the humans spread out in small clusters, they avoided the beasts. None of them wanted to be the first to experiment by talking to them, and since none of them were the main characters here anyway, why should they take a risk? Soon the other members of the 5 families arrived as well. There was a stark difference between the Morrison family and the rest, however. While the other families only came with 2 followers each, the Morrison family, which had access to the golden keys, appeared with over 20 golden core cultivators, not including Rorik and Audrey. "Show off," the fat man, the only fat nascent cultivator in sight, muttered. Instead of getting offended, Brandon grinned at the remark. Yes, he did in fact like showing off. In fact, in the 1970s Brandon traveled the Earth as the world's most successful underwear model. His youthful looks and well-sculpted body drew admiration and praise everywhere he went, not to mention various sponsorships. Yet he decided to stop when Audrey, following in his footsteps, also became a model. Alas, while Brandon listened to his wife dutifully, she herself didn't give a rat's behind what anyone told her and did as she pleased, and only gave up the career when she grew bored of it. Those were some of the darkest days of Rorik Morrison's life. "Shall we head to the Colosseum?" asked Sam, ignoring the gloating narcissist. "Wait for my grandson. I sent him here a few days in advance, he will update us on the matters here." Richard, the fat man, and Sam only nodded, and patiently waited for Alexander. The Queen had not bothered waiting for them as she had another objective. One of her 2 designated followers was someone sent by the lady in the hologram that the 5 nascents had reported to. His only job was to observe everything so that he could report back once he returned. The queen had volunteered for the job and the rest decided to keep their distance. Even though they knew it was a fundamental truth, none of the nascents liked being reminded that they reported to someone higher up. On Earth they were without equal, but in the vast universe that meant little. It did not take long before Alexander found the group. Helen had to stay back at the manor this time, as they may need to discuss sensitive matters and her presence might be inappropriate. No one asked it of her, she volunteered on her own, but the effect was the same. "Little man, you're growing up so fast. When I was your age, I hadn't even embarked on the path of cultivation." Ah, those summer days, working in the city, flirting with girls. The fat man seemed to be reminiscing, but his casual musings were cut short by Audrey, who said, "Are you telling my grandson to go around flirting with girls? I suppose you have a few candidates in mind?" The fat man froze, feeling awkward. Compared to the rest, the fat man had a very casual attitude and almost behaved like a mortal. In his views, there was nothing wrong with a teenager flirting with some girls, right? However, for some reason he didn't understand, every one of the other nascent families assumed he was always trying to set up his daughters or granddaughters to their families. Please, he couldn't be bothered with such old-fashioned thoughts, yet somehow that was the impression everyone had of him. "Little Alexander, tell Grandpa, has anything interesting happened so far?" Alexander quickly briefed everyone on his encounter with Slag, and shared the information that he got from him. He was observing everyone else's reactions, hoping to learn something. They were curious, and asked many questions about the Empire, but none of them seemed surprised by the talk of galaxies of empires. Alexander said nothing, countless thoughts were running through his head. After asking Alexander a few more questions, Sam said, "So only representatives from 2 planets have made it here so far? The 3rd planet, this Vegas Minima, must be next then. We should wait and see what they look like." The rest were about to nod at his suggestion, but then, just as he finished speaking, 200 portals opened simultaneously. The timing was oddly coincidental, and not at all purposeful, the work of mystical forces that did not want to waste more time on idle conversations. In true military fashion, 600 uniformed men and women stepped through the portal at the exact same time. Most of them were golden core cultivators, but there were at least 80 nascent realm cultivators and at least a couple above that realm. Lex focused all his attention on this new incoming force, as their strength was by far the biggest and most dangerous. It was clear that these newcomers were a part of an army, and Lex did not even need to guess to know that they must be from the same battalion as Slag. The army underwent the same pressure of the Tier 7 guards as well as the warning and welcome from the hologram, but had the smallest reaction. Quickly, the 600 men started arranging themselves in small teams that they had probably agreed upon beforehand. They did not take combat stances and appeared only to be standing together in small groups of 10, yet Lex could feel that not a single one of these soldiers had their guards down. They were ready to fight to the death at a moment's notice. General Ragnar, who stood with an entourage of 9 people behind him, looked at the various guests at the inn. He noticed all the beasts in the vicinity eyeing them, as well as oddly dressed humans that were from a different planet. Before he could do anything, Slag marched as quickly as he could without breaking into a run and appeared before the general and saluted him. "Lieutenant Slag of the 7th Forward Battalion, reporting for duty, sir," he said in a very robotic fashion. "Authenticate," Ragnar said, and one of his followers stepped forward with a machine that he placed in front of Slag's eye. The machine scanned not only his face and eye, but his brain directly. A green light lit up on the machine, along with details about Slag. "Lieutenant Slag, according to reports, you went MIA a few days ago. What are you doing here?" Ragnar asked, directly using his spirit sense to speak into Slag's mind. "I stumbled through a golden door while escaping enemy combatants and arrived here, sir. I thought it would be more useful if I collect data about the Midnight and then return immediately. I have compiled a report of my findings." "All right, fall into line," Ragnar said, indicating that Slag should join his personal entourage. "Tell the soldiers to disperse and act according to their directives. We will regroup at the Colosseum." His orders were passed down and the soldiers had just started to move around when the remaining 100 portals opened up simultaneously as well. The latest arrivals did not come in the uniform style of the military, and walked through the portals one by one, yet the impact of their arrival was the biggest so far. The beasts, the humans from Earth and especially the soldiers of the Empire all tensed up when they saw zombies walking through. In fact, unseen by everyone, it was Lex who was shocked the most. Zombies? How could they come? He had made sure in his selection parameters for the silver keys to enter that the leaders should be sentient and intelligent. These zombies, that ranged all the way from Tier 2 to Tier 5, definitely should have not entered. Although immediately he noticed that the zombies at Tier 5 showed a remarkable level of intelligence, for a zombie that is. Finally, out of the last few portals stepped a few more guests who looked human at first glance. Yet it was only limited to the first glance, as one would quickly notice the various horns and tails these guests so proudly brandished. Devils, Ragnar muttered through gritted teeth. Chapter 113 Cross-dressing Devil. Even though Ragnar was not loud, as Lex was paying extra attention he clearly heard the term devil. Were these the leaders of the zombies? Did they get the keys? That was the only explanation. The atmosphere was extremely tense as the 600 Jotun soldiers immediately got in position for battle. The humans from Earth were dumbstruck watching these supposed fictional horror story creations appear. When they noticed the soldiers gearing up for a battle they started backing away quickly, so as not to get caught in the crossfire. Unexpectedly it was the beasts who had no affiliation with the humans and should not have known the demons who showed the greatest hostility. In fact, were it not for the quick reminder by a few smart beasts about the inn's non-combat rules, they may have already attacked. The devil did not seem to notice the ridiculous hostility pointed at them, and took a look around the inn as if they were truly admiring their latest vacation destination. They were amused by the holograms that took on the shape of the kind of devil they were, as they did not believe real devils would ever work here. Lex did not make any early announcements or reminders. After he calmed down from his initial shock, he did not panic either. He was still in a state of flow, and his mind and body were reacting perfectly to his intentions. His guards seemed insufficient to handle the situation should a battle arise, simply because he had not planned for them to deal with a battle. They were supposed to stop random fights and minor incidents. Individually or even in small groups, his guards could handle most situations that could arise. However, an organized fight between hundreds of soldiers and demons that not only outnumbered them but were also stronger than them overall was not something they could face. Yet what allowed Lex to remain calm was the knowledge that his bodyguard should be able to handle any of the leaders here. He did not need to fight the entire army, simply intimidate the leaders. Yet while intimidating them, he still had to maintain the facade of the strong yet mysterious innkeeper. If he reacted preemptively to prevent a fight it could be viewed as him acting out of fear for the situation to deteriorate. He had to wait for someone to take the first step, and then he would react. He was very grateful he hadn't been a miser and spent lavishly on his bodyguard. Yet it was not as if Lex did nothing at all. He identified the devil as well as the man that looked like leaders of the two armies and checked their statuses. Name, Ragnar Asulf. Age, 3574. Sex, male. Cultivation details? Too high for host to view. Species, human. Midnight in prestige level, 1. Condition. Remarks, knock knock who's there? It doesn't matter, because Hell's Butcher does not crack jokes, he cracks his enemies will to fight. Name, Loretta Pendalval Kilger. Age, 971. Sex, female. Cultivation details? Too high for host to view. Species, devil. Midnight in prestige level, 1. Remarks, don't look into her eyes, she's very shy. She may just blush and kill you. Lex's flow almost collapsed and the strict control he had on his twitchy lip almost broke when he read Loretta's status. That was because while the status clearly stated Loretta was a female, and even had a feminine name, sort of, he was clearly looking at a man. Or maybe the difference was curtailed in devils, he was not sure, but if Lex had to guess he would have clearly guessed that this was a man wearing cosplay horns. Even the black, leathery wings behind her back looked like a man's, looked masculine? Maybe Loretta was just wearing a disguise. Yes, that must be it. Not that he needed any new reasons to discriminate against devils, but seriously if that's how female devils looked he knew a lot of anime-crazed humans who would be seriously disappointed. The silence was going on for too long. Lex decided to proceed with the event as planned and deal with any situation that arises as it happens. The holograms for all the guests appeared simultaneously and said, now that all the guests are here, the event will begin shortly. Please make your way to the Colosseum. Somewhere on the other side of the inn in a forest a sloth was woken up from its slumber, only to see a whale staring at it directly in the eye. Holding on to the whale's tie was a turtle that seemed to be whispering something to one of the trees nearby. Back at the inn's entrance the tension could be cut with a knife, yet no one dared to be the first one to act. It was one of the devils who finally chuckled and said, "Oh children, why don't you take a seat while Papa goes for a round with the boys? Don't do anything naughty while I'm gone." The zombies, as if taking his instructions very seriously, sat down on the ground, taking a seat on the dirt. Lex looked at this devil's information, curious to see if he could get any information on how he ordered the zombies. Was it something all devils could do, or this specific one? Name, Warhalhal Fendel. Age, 12,100. Sex, male. Cultivation details? Too high for host to view. Species, devil. Midnight in prestige level, 1. Remarks, don't be fooled by appearances, the the clothes he's wearing are worth more MP than you've ever collected. Quick, offer him some cake. This was by far the oldest guest Lex ever had, so he naturally assumed he was probably very strong. For a moment, he started feeling doubtful. Would his bodyguard be enough? But the doubt was momentary. He spent 1 million on a single individual. Whatever his realm was, Lex was sure that it would be enough. Warhol may have started first, but he was careful to stay one step behind Loretta, something that everyone noticed. Ragnar was struggling with a decision. His instinct was to immediately take this opportunity to kill the devils, yet logic told him that they would not have appeared in public unprepared for an assault. Furthermore, he had yet to learn anything about the Midnight Inn. If the owner of the inn was able to contact him directly, as well as others all over the world without leaving a trace, he was not a simple man. Not to mention, even the Jotun Empire did not lightly use interplanetary teleportation, yet here it was being used casually to teleport random beasts and people over. But Ragnar was not an indecisive man. He hesitated but for a few moments, before he ordered his troops to march towards the Colosseum. The holograms guided everyone, but the building was massive and clearly visible, so they really didn't need any help. Seeing that both the devils as well as the soldiers were moving without incident, the beasts as well as the earthlings decided to do the same. Alexander, listen to me, said Brandon seriously. Go call Marlowe, tell him to come to me immediately. Once that is done, you and Helen both return to Earth immediately. Once there, I want you to seal yourself in the safety bunker, don't let anyone know you're back. I will summon you out once I return to Earth. Marlowe's in the meditation room, I don't think I'll be able to go in, he replied. Do what you can. He's faced zombies before in combat, his experience will guide us if things take a turn for the worse. Not to mention, it isn't only for us. If something were to happen and he was meditating, then he would be gravely injured. I'll see what I can do, Alexander said, and started sprinting towards the manor. He planned on getting Helen first, then going to fetch Marlowe. Everyone moved towards the Colosseum, the original jovial mood changed drastically. Even Will and Hera, who originally planned on attending the meeting, returned back to Earth. Will briefly considered sending Hugo, but then decided that to be safe he would wait until tomorrow. At that time he could directly ask the innkeeper or some of the staff the details for the event. Soon, nearly 2,700 guests were seated in the Colosseum, leaving large empty gaps between each group. Even with this many people, most of the seats were empty, so it wasn't really a problem to find a suitable seat. Sam was filling the queen in on what she missed, and her follower who had been sent to observe was greatly shocked to hear about the devils. It appeared as though he knew of them. The 5 nascents naturally noticed his reaction, and looked towards him, waiting for an explanation. The follower, noticing this, cleared his throat and said, You don't need to know much. Just know, the devils are our enemies. The weakest devil is still far beyond what your planet can handle, so it is in your best interest to turn the other way should you ever encounter one. If something happens here, don't wait to see how things turn out. Escape back to Earth directly. Before anyone could ask him any questions, a man finally appeared on center stage. His casual smile and relaxed demeanor did not match the tense atmosphere at all. Welcome guests to the Midnight Inn. Chapter 114. An itch. Under normal circumstances, Lex would have been extremely nervous with almost 2,700 people focused on him. Even up until yesterday, or to be more accurate, earlier this morning, Lex did not feel ready to address such a crowd without stuttering or at least mumbling or mispronouncing a few words. Yet right now, the way he looked at the crowd was completely calm and natural. It was as if he believed they should be the ones nervous in his presence, not the other way around. He scanned the crowd briefly once, his eyes passing over the 4 divided groups. His gaze paused a second longer when he looked at the devils, but continued on as if they were just ordinary guests. It brings me great pleasure that you all could make it, he said, his voice loud yet still casual. For those of you who did not get the opportunity to take a tour, or skipped it, let me introduce you to the inn. For the travelers of the universe, or those who just want a home away from home, for the adventurers who want a respite, or the scholars who want to broaden their horizons, for anyone in need, anywhere in the universe, the Midnight Inn is the destination for you. We offer you rest, security, opportunity, adventure, excitement, enlightenment and more. I am the innkeeper, and this is my humble establishment. Lex paused for a moment. He had just received a new quest from the system, and he was going to ignore reading it till he was done, yet a simple glance at the notification let him know how serious this quest was. He quickly made a plan in his head, and decided how to deal with it. This was going to be the fastest quest he ever completed. Recently, 3 new planets gained access to the inn. To celebrate this, and to nurture an environment that promotes mutual growth and camaraderie, I decided to host the Midnight Games, which will allow the 3 worlds to share their culture with one another, and compete in some games for prizes. He paused again, this time a little longer, as he looked through his guests. He spotted Marlowe entering the Colosseum, clearly agitated. Some of his muscle had returned, but Lex did not bother paying attention to that right now. He looked at all the guests' faces, looked in their eyes, to see if he still had their attention. The oddly dressed humans, cross-dressed devils, and confused beasts all had their eyes focused on him. No one had said a single word so far, but he would give them an opportunity to speak soon enough. Not to mention, some guests might not really wait to be given an opportunity. The Midnight Games will be divided into two portions. The first portion will be a cultural show. Any and all guests from each planet can participate, and the event will entail whatever format the guest requires, whether it be a show, a presentation, a game or anything else. Of course, you cannot harm other guests in the process. This portion will be divided into a few stages. The first is the general stage, where everyone will be allocated a space and will have their presentations simultaneously. Based on genuine audience response, appreciation and popularity, candidates will be selected into the qualifying round, where they will be given the stage to present in front of the entire audience. That will lead to the finale, where the last two finalists will be given center stage. The winning team will win a prize not only for themselves, but for their entire planet as well. I hope that through that experience the people of all planets come closer together, and learn from each other's strengths and weaknesses. After that, of course, will then lead to the combat and the actual games portion of the Midnight Games, much to some people's delight. Lex gave Marlowe a look before continuing. This portion is a little different, and also dangerous. Instead of taking place here at the inn, these games will be taking place on Vegas Minima. That statement made Ragnar frown slightly, and caused Loretta to raise an eyebrow in curiosity. Some of you already know, though most do not, that there is a great undertaking going on in Vegas Minima at the moment. For those of you that do not know, I will explain the details a little. Naturally, Lex himself did not know about events happening on Vegas Minima, but under the events panel he can view major events going on in all planets connected to the inn. He can incorporate those events into his own using the panel, which is how he learned about the largest event taking place on Vegas Minima, the hunt for the spawning portal, as well as a detailed description of events relating to it. Currently, the planet is divided. Much of it is under the control of demons known as zombies, while the rest of it is under the control of humans. This was a simple statement, but it attracted the attention of almost all guests. Some of the beasts suspected as much, but learning that an entire planet, though they still did not understand the concept of a planet, was being controlled by humans shocked them. The Jotun soldiers and devils were focused because clearly these games were about to have a direct impact upon their confrontation that had just begun. Based on the direction of the games, support could go on either side. As for the Earthlings, well, which one of them had never seen a zombie apocalypse movie? It was as if their fantasies were coming to life in front of their eyes, and they were truly enraptured. Some of you may think that it is a simple battle, since the zombies have no direct way of reproducing, killing them would slowly but surely eliminate the zombies from the planet once and for all. But it is not so simple. You see, there is a spawning portal on the planet that lets more zombies enter the planet infinitely from another realm. The humans are desperately trying to locate the spawning portal, while the demons are doing everything in their power to keep it hidden. But in this struggle, the demons have had the advantage of time. They've taken a long time to set up a formation that not only hides the portal, it protects it from interstellar attacks. Should any weapons of mass destruction be used, the formation will channel the destructive energy directly into the planet's core, destabilizing it and ultimately destroying the whole planet. Lex's words caused not only Ragnar to grimace, it caused the devils to frown as well. This was not a new tactic used in the war against demons, and was in fact a very common one. Unless the occupants are ready to sacrifice the entire planet, such a formation would prevent the use of not only high-leveled cultivators, it would prevent the use of heavily destructive technological weapons. Unless the formation can be located, that is. With that background information, I think I can begin to explain the games. The protective formation has 10 very important nodes that keep it running, and so there will be 10 games. Dear Innkeeper, Loretta finally interrupted Lex, having completely understood the direction this was going in. But even while interrupting, her disguised masculine voice did not sound aggressive or accusatory, but rather remorseful and regretful. It seems to me that there is a lot of discrimination going on in your Midnight Games. I thought the point of this event was to get along together, build camaraderie and learn about each other's cultures. Yet now it seems to me that this is all just a build-up to a slaughter of my people. Loretta wiped an imaginary tear off her cheek as she said the last part. That's not very nice, is it? Not the kind of behavior I would expect from an inn. Especially not one that is trying to operate without needlessly provoking some enemies. Lex smirked. He was waiting for this, and so were a lot of people, and beasts. "I think there has been some kind of misunderstanding," he said, amusement quite evident in his tone. "The Midnight Inn only ever promotes peaceful gatherings that help not only our guests, but the entire communities that they belong to. As a business, we have no interest in having enemies, only more guests. Our sole focus is on spreading our name across the universe, so that anyone who needs to rest knows exactly where they can come to." See, again. Your actions and intentions aren't really a reflection of your words. How can you say you're not making any enemies when you're clearly targeting us? How can you condemn an entire planet full of my precious zombies to death, and yet claim to be looking for more guests? At her question, Lex started laughing. It was not a chuckle or a giggle, or a small laugh that ended quickly. It was a clear, loud laugh full of mirth and amusement. The sound of his voice echoed across the Colosseum. It was not oppressive or tinged with hidden anger, but genuine amusement. Yet the more it was like this, the more the devils frowned, and the more Ragnar looked confused. They needed no explanation to understand that the Innkeeper did not take them as a serious threat at all. "Loretta dear," Lex said, wiping actual tears from his eyes, "I am not provoking enemies, I am just hosting some games, do you understand? I am not condemning a planet full of zombies to death, these are just simple games." The devils and even the humans felt their back tingle at the man who considered the fate of an entire planet as a game. "I have guests from all over the universe. I do not discriminate, and host everyone equally, so long as they obey the rules of the inn. Do you understand? But when certain guests come to my inn and repeatedly attack me, well, I don't mind tweaking my games just a bit. After all, how long can one ignore an itch before scratching it?" Lex asked the question wearing his brightest and most genuine smile, yet no one felt as lighthearted as he looked right now. This was the Innkeeper, and even the devil's threat was nothing more than an itch to him. The Colosseum was silent, each group for their own reasons. The beasts, despite having very strong representation, were the most confused. They did not understand a lot of the concepts that were being discussed, not because they were stupid, but because they focused their society on individual growth, and not the growth of the whole. They formed and stayed in their own territories, and the only exchange they had with their neighbors was defending from expansion, or expanding themselves. This caused their growth as a civilization to stagnate, and their individual power levels weren't high enough to leave the planet, so their knowledge base existed only up to a certain point. The beasts technically could not be blamed for this, as the term beasts was a generic term. For example, humans treated feline beasts and avian beasts both as if they were under the same category, but were they really? That beasts treated those of the same species kindly, but were mostly hostile to other species. Looking at it from this point of view, it made sense that they were not eager to share their knowledge and progress with other beasts. After all, even on Earth, despite all the humans' technological progress, did they share any of it with the beasts? They were both sentient beings, so technically they could, but the species barrier was a difficult one to overcome. The Earthlings were silent, not because they couldn't understand what was happening, but because they were clearly the weakest ones here. They were ready to participate in the Midnight Games, but if participating in them meant provoking the devils as enemies, they would need to run a cost-benefit analysis. For the Jotun soldiers, it was even simpler. They were there to fill the numbers and act as soldiers. Only Ragnar and his entourage had the authority to speak here. As for why Ragnar was silent? Some of it was because of the weight of what the Innkeeper said, but mostly because he was staring at the devil the Innkeeper called Loretta. He did not know the identity of this devil, but he knew very well that there was a high-importance target amongst the devils called Loretta. Could this really be the same one? And if so, how did the Innkeeper know? Despite the Empire's best efforts, they were not able to get a lot of details about this Loretta. The devils, of course, were filled with a hostile silence. They were ready to attack at their leader's order. It was true that the Innkeeper's attitude depicted him as an extremely strong individual who treated an entire planet as nothing more than a plaything, but then again, were they as devils any weaker? Their might was feared by even the strongest across the universe, and their influence undeniable. Yet the reason Loretta herself was silent was because of the shock. How did the Innkeeper know her identity? It was impossible. Her disguise was perfect, and even those stronger than her should not have been able to determine who she was. Unless, of course, the Innkeeper was even stronger than they had first suspected. Speaking of an itch, Lex continued, deciding this was the perfect time to complete the latest quest he had just received. Since I was in the middle of my introduction for the Midnight Games, I did not bother addressing this. But you have interrupted to address grievances, so this will have to serve as an opportune moment. My inn has some rules, not too many, and I don't need to share them because it is considered common sense. Yet I understand that there are many species across the universe, and they have a unique concept for what entails common sense. So I will take this time to elaborate on some of the rules. All guests are welcome, regardless of their age, background, species, affiliation, or anything else. Yet what is not welcome is a hostile attitude. Attacking, threatening or harming any guest or employee of the inn is completely unacceptable. On 3 separate incidents, your zombies have found their way to my inn and directly attacked me. But I do not blame you for others' actions, so that is fine. Yet now, in my presence, your fellow devil has been planting tracers on a number of my guests. Tell me, Loretta, should I now hold all your devils accountable for his actions, since you came together? Or just that single delinquent? Suddenly all the guests besides the devils froze, and started sweeping themselves for the so-called tracers. Instantly, the Colosseum was filled with hundreds of spirit senses, yet none of them were able to locate the tracers. How could it be that easy? After all, the devil's cultivation was much higher than the rest, and even Lex himself, with access to knowledge of everything happening in the inn, didn't notice until the quest. The quest stated that one of the devils had been planting tracers on various guests in order to trace them back to their planets, and that as the innkeeper he could not allow such hostile behavior to go unnoticed. He not only had to eliminate the tracers, he had to punish the devil in question. The guests were beginning to get confused, as none of them were able to find the tracers. Lex did not break his eye contact with Loretta during this time, and was able to pick up the surprise in her eyes. Yet before she responded, one of the devils made a move. He was too fast for Lex to even spot, let alone react to. One moment he was sitting behind Loretta, the next he was in front of Lex with a dagger pointed towards Lex's skull. In fact, the devil did not mean to stop or slow down enough to be seen. He was aiming to stab Lex through the skull, but right as he was exactly 1 foot away from Lex, he froze. None of the guests were able to see the devil make a move, other than Ragnar and a particular sloth. Without flinching or reacting at all, Lex turned to look casually from Loretta towards the black dagger that was pointed towards him. He could physically feel the sinister intent planted within that dagger, and let alone a stab. Lex knew that if the dagger had even touched him, he would have died. So why had the demon stopped? Because behind him stood Lex's bodyguard, with his hand placed on the devil's shoulder. Several audible gasps could be heard from the audience as people came to realize what had just happened. Someone had tried to attack the innkeeper so quickly they were not even able to notice. A wave of fear filled the guests as they looked at the devils, who were still sitting there casually. Some members of the audience, however, were staring at the bodyguard in absolute horror. A celestial. John screamed in his mind as he did his best to stop himself from trembling. What kind of insane maniac was he working for, that also had a celestial working for him? What ridiculous kind of existence could even convince those arrogant freaks to work for him? It appears as though the punishment shall go to the delinquent alone, Lex said, looking at Loretta. When you dispose of him, please do so neatly. It would be a shame to waste excellent fertilizer, Lex told the bodyguard. The bodyguard chuckled despite himself, as he could not believe the innkeeper had the guts to kill a devil. But what did it matter to him? Indeed, as John had guessed, this bodyguard was from a race known as Celestials. There was no one in the universe they feared. He performed no visible action, but the devil fell down, dead. As soon as the corpse hit the ground, Lex received the quest complete notification. For now, he ignored the notification and sent the body to the greenhouse. He smiled at Loretta, as if he did not just order the death of her companion, and said, "Please don't think this means that you are not welcome here. So long as you follow the rules, you're more than welcome to stay. You may even participate in the games though. Unfortunately, I will not be able to change the conditions of the games for you, so you will still be fighting zombies." But how could Loretta be in the mood to stay here any longer? The innkeeper had a freaking celestial working for him. Not to mention, he looked right through her disguise. Despite arranging for the devils to attend this meeting along with a small army of zombies, it seemed that they had underestimated the Midnight Inn. They may need to rethink the kind of relationship they wanted to have with this newly encountered organization. Not that they feared the inn, but they would suffer more than they would gain by being enemies. Moreover, she now needed to deal with the aftermath of the death of a devil under her command. The Jotun Empire would serve as an adequate scapegoat, especially since Ragnar was here. Even with her status and power, she did not consider assigning blame to the celestial that did the deed, or the anomaly that could casually order one around. R115 A Celestial. Chapter 116. I'm running out of titles. The Colosseum was once again filled with silence. The tension was palpable, and though no one was actively exerting the pressure of their cultivation, some of the weaker earthlings felt like they were going to faint. Yet even with such a scene, there were a few who did not take the situation too seriously. Firstly, as could be predicted, was Marlowe. The former behemoth sat comfortably in his chair near the 5 nascent cultivators, with a table laid out in front of him. He was casually eating some egg-fried rice with a side of dry beef chili, as if he were watching a movie in his bedroom. Second was the sloth. It was asleep. The third, sitting amongst the beasts, was actually a tree. Well, technically, it was not sitting, it was standing. It had rolled up all its roots beneath it, and stood firmly in its seat. Its focus was not on what was happening in the Colosseum, but on shaking off the birds that would keep coming to sit in its branches. The endeavor was truly frustrating. I see, Loretta finally replied calmly. Thank you for clearing up that misunderstanding. Please, continue with your explanation. I am eager to hear the details of the games. Lex smiled approvingly at her, as if an adult proud of a little girl who finally managed to calculate 1 plus 1 when she first started school. I'm glad you understand. Games are only fun when everyone participates. If you have to keep changing the rules of the game because of a few people, then it affects everyone's enjoyment. Lex's words were polite, but who there did not understand the naked threat in his words? While Lex was exchanging words with the devil, the celestial bodyguard was looking around at the crowd with an internal frown. Earlier, he was hidden, so it made sense that his natural aura was not affecting everyone. Yet now that he was out in the open, they were still unaffected. He was not used to so many beings existing so casually in his presence. He noticed a few here and there who recognized who, or rather, what he was, and that filled them with an appropriate amount of dread, yet seeing the rest completely unaware bothered him. When in his life had he gone anywhere without entire nations kneeling at even the reminiscent of his aura? Are you the one restraining my aura? He asked the innkeeper, clearly unsatisfied. He did not bother using his spirit sense, and asked directly. When had he, as a celestial, needed to care for subtlety or keeping others' faces? He intended to have the innkeeper end the restraint on his aura, or else he may have to consider whether this quest was worth his effort. Lex looked at his bodyguard and immediately understood that he was unsatisfied. This put him in a bit of a dilemma, as he had no way to deal with the bodyguard should he renege on his duty, but for now, he could not show weakness. Naturally. Since your aura is not a conscious attack on my guests, it is naturally suppressed in my inn, and there is no punishment for it. After all, how can I let my guests randomly suffer for no reason? In less than a millionth of a second after Lex finished speaking, the bodyguard was about to display his displeasure towards Lex. After all, since the innkeeper required a bodyguard, he must be weaker than the bodyguard himself. Yet before he could act, he heard a system notification in a tone he'd never heard before. Alert! Alert! Quest interference detected. Quest parameters changed. The punishment for quest failure has changed. New quest parameters: ensure the safety of everyone in the Midnight Inn for the duration of the quest. New quest failure punishment: cultivation will be completely sealed for 0.5 years. System, what is going on? Why did the quest change? This has never happened before. Checking host authority. Host authority is insufficient to learn details. Using special bloodline clearance. Host authority partially accepted. Host authority suppressed. Please raise your authority to learn the answer. His special bloodline clearance was suppressed. Yet another situation he had never encountered. At this point he could only speculate, yet the reason was most likely the innkeeper warning him. How the innkeeper could influence his system, he did not know. For now, he decided to behave. After all, being suppressed was also a novel feeling for him. The innkeeper was more mysterious than he seemed. Interesting, he murmured and disappeared. Seeing his bodyguard disappear, Lex was internally relieved, but did not let it show on his face. He believed that the bodyguard behaved because his system restrained him. Everyone in the audience believed that the innkeeper must have admonished his bodyguard secretly, which scared the very few who recognized the celestial. Even the bodyguard himself believed it was the innkeeper's doing. No one knew that a tiny, floating projection of a girl hovered behind Lex's head, looking at where the bodyguard had once stood. She snorted, then disappeared. Now, as I was saying, there are 10 very important nodes that keep the formation protecting the spawning portal protected. As a result, there will be 10 games, 5 for Foundation Realm cultivators and 5 for Golden Core cultivators. Each game will include all planets participating at the same time, and will be a group effort for each planet rather than an individual's efforts. The success or failure of each game will give each planet a certain number of points. Once all the games are concluded, the planet with the highest number of points will win. As for what will happen to the spawning portal once the games are over? That has nothing to do with the games, so it won't affect the outcome of the Midnight Games. Lex smiled and was about to proceed to the questions portion of this meeting when something occurred to him. Naturally, since it's a team effort, if certain team members from a planet try to sabotage the game, they will be immediately disqualified and removed. He did not look at or point towards anyone as he said this, but the devils grimaced and the Jotun soldiers breathed a sigh of relief. As much as Ragnar was interested in the reward, so long as the portal was revealed, he would consider it reward enough, which is why he never cared if the zombies or devils would try to participate and sabotage. In fact, he hoped such low-level devils would participate and give him the opportunity to kill them. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. Silence once again filled the air as they all waited for someone to ask the first question. It did not take long, however, before a Marlowe who had just finished his meal stood up and asked, "Is there an age limit on the cultivators for the games?" "No, so long as you fall within the category, anyone can participate." "And how safe are the games?" This was a question many people had in mind, and one Lex had also fretted over a lot. He did not want a lot of people to die, so he did his best to make it as safe as possible. Yet he was limited by his funds, and was unable to make it completely safe. The difficulty of each game will be based on the cultivation. But it will ultimately still be dangerous, and anyone who is not careful risks losing his life. This is one of the reasons that the games will be based on teamwork rather than individual games, to support and protect one another to achieve the goal. How well the contestants use this is up to them. Marlowe did not seem disappointed by the answer, and sat down with a grin. Unfortunately, he did not realize that even though his new cultivation method was incomplete, he no longer qualified as a golden core cultivator. The tree that had previously been shaking away the birds raised a single root, as if raising its hand to be called on. Lex looked at the tree's status and called out to it. "Yes, Ijashima, what is your question?" The tree had no mouth, so Lex expected it to speak using its spirit sense, yet who could have expected its leaves to start vibrating rapidly, causing a sound akin to the voice of a young lady to come out? "I will need a few days to set up for the culture show. Is that fine?" "Yes, it is not a problem. As soon as this meeting ends, anyone who wants to participate can register, and those that need to prepare beforehand can start doing so. The inn will cooperate with your needs." Once a few questions were asked, the guests became more comfortable asking questions and more started opening up. This continued for a while before Ragnar gave one of the men beside him a look, prompting him to stand up to ask a question. "I have a question that's not strictly related to the games, I hope you don't mind," he said, flashing the innkeeper an apologetic smile. This man did not look bulky or muscular like the rest of the Jotun soldiers. In fact, standing next to them his clear skin and delicate physique seemed even more prominent. It made one wonder how such a character ended up alongside these elite soldiers. "Go ahead." Lex was looking forward to interacting more with the Jotun soldiers. He planned to learn more about the so-called known universe from them, since eventually he was bound to have guests from planets in this territory. The more knowledge he had, the lesser his chances of making an ignorant mistake. "Is it alright if, during the midnight games, the Empire sets up a recruitment stall?" Lex raised an eyebrow in curiosity. This truly was not what he was expecting. Chapter 117 Sudden Conclusion. Lex was immediately faced with a conundrum. His decision here would set a precedent and would impact his future relationship with the many powers of the universe. On the one hand, he thought that this might be a good way of earning some MP and could charge them for the stall. On the other hand, should such a presence become a permanent part of his inn, it would automatically tag him as an ally or subordinate of the Jotun Empire to new powers. This was because he was sure that if he allowed them such a stall, they would try to keep it permanent. Not to mention, should the Jotun Empire realize they can get a permanent residence here, they won't hesitate to set up a permanent stall. He weighed the pros and cons in his head for a moment. Ultimately, the decision was completely up to him, and since he was feeling good, he allowed it, with some rules. For the duration of the event, you may host a stall for recruitment. However, you must follow some rules. You cannot solicit others, only if they come to you can you try to recruit them. You cannot coerce my guests, and you cannot manipulate them using their lack of understanding. You must explain to them in detail what you may recruit them for. Furthermore, I will assign a staff member to accompany you in your stall for the duration of its existence. The lanky man thanked the innkeeper as he did not mind those rules, but before he could sit back down, a voice he was not expecting to hear again spoke up. "In that case, you won't mind if the devils want to set up such a stall as well, right?" asked Loretta. The question not only froze the man, it stilled Ragnar's heart as well as everyone else's. Lex internally cursed himself. He had just told himself that if he allowed one, others would also follow, but conveniently forgot that another major force was also here. "Naturally, so long as you follow all the rules, there should be no problem," Lex replied to her. Loretta smiled, and let no satisfaction or reluctance show. She may have been testing the innkeeper's so-called neutrality, or may have been trying to create a divide between Lex and the Jotun Empire. Whatever the case, Lex already knew that if he catered to everyone, he would make some people dissatisfied. Yet even if it were not the rules of the inn itself, he would have done the same thing. There was a momentary pause in the questions, but this time the queen stood up and asked, "How do we bring the participants to the inn for each portion? And what about guests? How many people can we bring to view the games? Or can we watch the games from our planets?" Good questions, Lex said, glad things were getting back on topic, instead of being mired with politics. Each of the leaders who were invited to this meeting will be given a certain number of keys that they can take back to their planet to give to the participating guests. Each key will bring in 10 guests maximum. Should you require more keys, you can purchase them directly from your personal holographic assistants. The same is true for the audience as well, each leader will get keys for audience members. If you want to bring more, you can purchase the keys. Anyone will be able to watch the games live from the Colosseum or anywhere else in the inn, but not on your own planets. With that question, things came back into flow, and more people started asking questions again. One enthusiastic beast asked if he could travel to other planets from the inn, which sparked everyone's curiosity, to which Lex answered not at the moment, perhaps in the future. More questions came, mostly about what kind of display would qualify as culture. Lex left it as open to interpretation as possible, setting only a very few restrictions. Most of the restrictions actually originated from the devil's questions, who at some point decided to participate as well. The restrictions were along the lines of no killing, no torture, no corrupting the souls of the damned, no furus, and no, what he meant to say was, no human or animal amalgamation tests, etc. Finally, after a while, the questions came to a close, and just as Lex was about to conclude the meeting, a sloth raised its hand. Yes? Les esqued. I do not have a question, the sloth said lazily, but I have a humble request for the other planets. Intrigued, Lex raised an eyebrow. I have noticed that no beasts were invited from the other 2 planets. If you have any, I would request that you invite them as well, and give them an opportunity to broaden their horizons. I would also like to meet them. Lex was not expecting such a request, but saw no reason to interfere, so he only looked on in silence at the other groups. While the Earthlings were hesitating, one of the devils spoke. Beasts, we have a few back in Garvets. We could bring some, if you feel lonely. That would be splendid, the sloth replied, as if ignorant of the sinister tone of the devil. Be careful dealing with the devils, sloth, Ragnar finally spoke. They are treacherous. Thank you for your warning, young human. But Nibiru is not a planet with an allegiance. We can handle some trials. The sloth's reply raised quite a few eyebrows, as so far the beasts had only displayed a complete lack of knowledge of the universe, let alone their own planet's name. It seemed things were not so simple. We will extend the invitation, the queen answered the sloth. Though whether or not they attend is out of our control. Seeing that matter settled, Ragnar stood up as well and said and looked towards the innkeeper, as if seeking permission to speak. Seeing Lex nod, he said, I too have a request. Before you all return, I would like to have an individual meeting with the leaders of your planet. Without missing a beat, Loretta asked, you want a meeting? Even with us? Especially with you, Ragnar said, not hiding his aggression at all. It was only out to respect or perhaps fear of the innkeeper that he had kept himself restrained so far. It seems to me that everyone is done with questions. If that is the case, let's conclude the meeting, said Lex. Yet before he could say anything else, Marlowe stood up abruptly, as if to emphasize that he had one last question. Yes? Lex asked in a tired voice, sure that this would not be a productive question. I remember hearing something about a combat arena? Can I challenge other guests to fights? Not during the midnight games, Lex stated flatly. I think that should do it for now. You all can ask your personal holograms if you have anything else. Feel free to stay as long as you want, though my suggestion is that you return to start preparations. With those words said, Lex disappeared from view, heading straight to his apartment. As soon as he returned, his previous state of flow that he was in broke. From being absolutely okay, he quickly went panting heavily. His rosy skin went pale and Lex started sweating. He felt the energy drain out of him like water leaking from a tank, and his previously clear head started fogging up. Unable to understand what was happening, Lex tried to stay awake, but collapsed the very next moment. He had been absolutely fine just up until a few minutes ago, but suddenly started feeling like he needed to wrap things up. At first he ignored the feeling, but the feeling only grew till it became apparent something was incredibly wrong. His initial plan was to stay around much longer and keep an eye on how his guests reacted to the information he provided. He especially wanted to spy on the meetings Ragnar was planning, yet in the end, he had to return to his apartment. What he did not know was that his ability to enter a flow and perform absolutely perfectly according to the situation was not a normal state. It fed heavily on his spirit or mental energy. In fact, had his spirit not stabilized just in time for the meeting, he would not have been able to maintain that state for nearly as long. This was not to say that he could not have held the meeting without being in such a state, but he definitely would not have handled things as well, especially with the pressure of the devils and the Jotun Empire. Since his cultivation was low, he could not accurately gauge his mental energy. Normally when he was running out, he would feel a physical signal from his body, such as mental exhaustion or fatigue, but his state of flow allowed him to ignore it. Well, he could ignore it right up until the last moment. Had he not ended the meeting quickly, he would have collapsed in front of everyone. Chapter 118. Ragnar starts to move. The innkeeper's sudden departure left the audience in an awkward silence. When was the last time any of them had been dismissed in such a cavalier manner? Yet the innkeeper leaving in such a manner did not arouse any suspicion, but only strengthened the perception that he was much stronger than them and that he really was only treating these as games. Summoning his holographic assistant, Ragnar asked, "Is there some place I can have a private meeting? Some place I won't be overheard?" "Naturally," the hologram answered. "You can rent one of our regular rooms, all of which comes with natural sound insulation and complete protection from outside snooping. You can also rent a room within the Colosseum, which has the same benefits. Please note, should you choose to rent a room in the Colosseum, the longest you can rent for is the duration of the event." "Good, we'll rent a room in the Colosseum till the event ends," he told the hologram, not bothering to ask about the price. It didn't make a difference though, the price was the same. Turning to his followers, he started giving instructions immediately. Have the soldiers split up. Have the reconnaissance team 1 through 5 undergo the tour, and have team 6 explore on their own. Have the rest of the soldiers positioned within view of the zombies, and keep tabs on their movements. Have delegations approach each of the planet's leaders and set a time for a meeting. I've marked down the suspected leaders for the beasts as well as the humans, but you can ask around just to be sure. Also, have Alpha Team 1 follow the devil's every move. No need to be subtle about it, I want them to know that we're following them. Send back someone to Vegas Minima to submit a preliminary report of events to the command carrier. But for now, in the report, no need to mention the trigger terms Loretta or Celestial. In fact, let all the soldiers know, all information about the Midnight Inn is considered platinum level confidential. Also, pass word to the commanders on Vegas Magnum and Vegas Prime to adjust their searching method according to the new information we have about the formation. Once done with the report, have them run a full database search on the names Nibiru and Earth. I want to know any information we have about them. Slag, you're with me. It's time you gave your report. As soon as Ragnar was done speaking, his soldiers dispersed in an orderly fashion, moving with direction and purpose. Their clear focus and discipline impressed the Earthlings, who were watching from afar. The display told them that their chances at the combat portion of the games would be weak, yet some of them wanted to try anyway. Ragnar and his entourage teleported directly into the room that he had rented. The first thing Ragnar did was sweep the room with his spiritual senses very thoroughly. When he found nothing, and noticed that his senses were not able to pry into neighboring rooms, he felt reassured. That did not mean he left things as is. Simple eye contact with one of his followers prompted him to start setting up seclusion formation around the room. This would prevent prying spiritual senses from entering, as well as stop any signals from the room going out. The signal block was to stop any recon device, formation or treasure they may have missed. Their actions were practiced and professional, and only 10 minutes later the already secure room became even harder to spy on. But they were not done yet. Each man in the room summoned their private assistant and told them to give them some privacy until they left the room. The assistants obliged and disappeared. Immediately it occurred to Ragnar that this could be a potential loophole in the inn's security. If the rooms really were as private as they claimed, and if even the assistants were sent away, someone could easily commit murder in their room. Of course, getting someone into your room and then having them dismiss their assistant without arousing suspicion was a difficult task in itself. Maybe there were other ways in which the inn provided security, but those were thoughts for another time. "Lieutenant Slag, I've already gone through the report you compiled," Ragnar said, looking at the man. "Is there anything else of importance you would like to bring attention to? Speak freely." "Yes, sir. After investigating the inn and its guests for the past few days, there are a few things I've speculated on. I could not investigate the guests too closely without offending the innkeeper, but I took this opportunity to converse with almost everyone and have come to certain inferences. Firstly, in the time I've been here, I've only seen guests from Vegas Minima, Earth and Nibiru. Yet the innkeeper claims that they have guests from all over the universe. Assuming that is true, I suspect that there is more than one inn. The inns should be divided either by the level of the planets, or more likely, there should be a separate inn for a certain given quadrant of space. If that were true, this specific inn might be the newest one, which is why it is still only accepting guests from 3 planets. From time to time the innkeeper disappears, so it would make sense if he was handling matters at the other inns. Of course, I have no proof of this, so this is mere speculation. Secondly, from my analysis of the event and my conversation with guests who have stayed at the inn previously, I suspect I may have gained insight into the true reason behind the Midnight Games. On the premise that there were no outside interference such as that of the devils or our empire, the 3 planets selected all would have civilizations below star level. None of them would have exceeded the scope of their own solar systems. Keeping this knowledge in mind, along with the various facilities provided at the inn that promote nurturing and trade, I believe the goal of the Innkeeper is to accelerate the growth of these planets or civilizations. Thirdly, I did not get an opportunity to meet guests from Nibiru, other than an incident where a beast attacked the Innkeeper, so I have no information on them. Yet I did meet a lot of them from Earth, and spotted some guests I suspect are from Vegas Minima, but cannot confirm because they kept avoiding me. Earth seems to be a human-dominant planet with no clear-cut planet-wide ruler. I cannot ascertain the level of the average cultivators, but I had a run-in with 2 elites. One of them was a youth at the Foundation realm named Alexander. I did not even need my spirit sense to determine that his cultivation has few, if any weaknesses, and that he has great potential to grow. The second was a man named Marlowe. You saw him at the Colosseum, he's the one who asked the question about the combat arena. At this point, Slag stopped for a moment. He would never even consider hiding information from his general, yet this next bit embarrassed him greatly and was not easy to say. My encounter with Marlowe may not have been, under the best of circumstances. Seeing the potential of the youth, and the fact that he was from a planet supposedly free from intergalactic influence, I attempted to recruit him. Unfortunately, it seems Alexander was Marlowe's student and the other did not take kindly to my recruitment attempt. Using one hand, with his cultivation sealed, Marlowe defeated me in a competition of strength while I used my full force. His last statement alarmed not only Ragnar, but the rest in the room. None of them knew Slag personally. How could they be expected to know each soldier when they had hundreds of thousands under their command? Yet the fact that he was a lieutenant spoke for itself. It was impossible to gain rank unless you had the equivalent strength. However, he was defeated one-handed. Fortunately, they did not drop pretenses and maintained a non-hostile relationship with me following. Marlowe subsequently asked me various times to join if he could join the Empire, but it is blatantly obvious that he has ulterior motives. I dared not promise him anything. Other than them, I encountered a businessman from Earth named Will. He was extremely eager to discuss potential trade opportunities. I told him I would refer him to the appropriate people when the time came. Ragnar listened to Slag's report very seriously, but at the last statement, he could not stop himself from showing a smile. Ragnar had read Slag's report during the meeting, and also checked up on Slag's history in the army, as well as his personality report. Very similar to Ragnar himself, Slag was an orphan and lived his entire life parallel to, or in the army. His early education had been in an army public school, and at age 15 he had enrolled into an army boarding school. His life and career path had been mostly straightforward, similar to Ragnar himself. So then how could Ragnar not understand that when Slag said that he would refer Will to the appropriate people, what he really meant was he had no knowledge of trade and would let someone else carry that headache? Honestly, even at their level, the army was full of muscle heads. Ragnar was a very serious man, but even then, as someone who had spent every waking moment of his life in the army, how could he not be amused by the simple plights of his soldiers? Chapter 119 Fruit of his labor. 1 second. That was exactly how long it took for Ragnar to absorb all the information Slag had given him, remove the unnecessary parts, focus on things he thought were unimportant but actually might be, and form his own theories different from what Slag originally thought. He was quick not because the information was brief, but because his thoughts worked imperceptibly faster than normal humans. There was one very important thing that Slag had not realized in his assessment of the inn. His mistake wasn't really his fault actually, it was a result of his understanding of the universe being limited. Guessing on the possibility of there being other inns was not something that could be done at the moment, because early conjecture without sufficient evidence would blind them to other possibilities and cause them to misinterpret new evidence to somehow fit into the narrative they thought most likely. It also led to an entirely different line of thought such as, were there different innkeepers for each inn, or did the same one manage them all? How were they formed? Where did they exist? How were they hidden? All of these questions were extremely important, but also distractions. Everything had to be done in a systematic manner, haphazardly making guesses would lead to inefficiency. One of the first things that needed to be focused on was where the inn was. Before arriving at the inn, Ragnar had equipped a special device that would transmit his location to any Jotun carrier, planet, server, satellite, or basically anything that could connect to their main database. He did not expect to get a result immediately, but based on their latest technology, if within 24 hours the signals were unable to reach such a device, it would lead to a few very interesting possibilities. The first and foremost of those was that the inn was in an alternate space, cut off from the main universe. This was the most likely option, as such a thing wasn't altogether uncommon. Another possibility was that his signals were somehow blocked. This was a little more unlikely. This signal was based on the newest technology that most did not even know existed yet. Basically, so long as any form of energy existed, the signal could use it to carry itself forward. This went beyond just common forms of energy such as kinetic, light, gravitational, spirit, etc. Even higher forms of energy, that most beings could not even perceive or interact with, could be used as a medium. Another possibility, one that Ragnar thought had a high chance of being correct, was that the end was so far from anywhere in the known universe that it was taking much longer for the signal to be transmitted. Such a theory also meant that the entity known as the Midnight End was a power from the uncharted territories of the universe, and the Innkeeper was a cultivator that no existing topmost cultivator had ever interacted with yet. This theory was troublesome. Still, he would not speculate until he had more information. Good. You will follow me from now on, and if you think of any new information you may inform me directly via spirit sense. Anthony, start running tests immediately. I want to know the density of the spiritual energy, the gravity index, the day cycle, the oxygen concentration of the air, basically everything there is to know about this place. Yes sir, answered the relatively weak-looking man who had asked Lex about setting up a recruitment stall. Without waiting to see what they did, Ragnar exited the room, Slag following behind him. Outside a soldier was waiting for him. Did the devils agree to the meeting? Yes sir, they've invited you to their room for the meeting. All of them are there, none of them have split from the main room. Only one is waiting outside for you to invite you in. Good, let's go. Ragnar decided to meet the devils first as he had a very important task he wanted to complete. With the other delegates, there were actual important matters that needed to be discussed. With the devils, Ragnar simply wanted to vent by insulting them. The man had spent over 1,000 years fighting devils, and had long since evolved past mundane emotions as hating devils for righteous reasons. The way he saw it now was simple. Since they were the enemy, he would take pleasure in their discomfort. You can only enter alone, the devil standing outside their room told Ragnar as he approached. He had a mischievous smile as he waited for Ragnar to argue with him, but this devil had never interacted with Ragnar before. How could he know the butcher's personality? Then let's get on with it, he said bluntly, as if he could not have cared less even if he tried. Ragnar did not put even a second thought into the fact that he had discovered a security flaw in the room earlier. As far as he was concerned, nothing would make him happier if the devils would ambush him in the room. The remaining soldiers stood face to face with the devil as he teleported Ragnar inside. They grinned at him, as if welcoming any trouble he would cause. These were the elitist soldiers in their battalion. If they didn't face a near-death experience every day, it would feel like they were wasting their time. Inside the room, several devils sat on sofas and on the bed, like a group of friends hanging out. Somehow, they already had drinks and food in the room, and there was one, particularly emo-looking devil playing a musical instrument in the corner. What did an emo devil look like? Like an 80-year-old man dressed like a teenager, with a single piercing that looked out of place and long unbrushed hair that covered his eyes. Loretta was sitting in the corner, eating jumbo shrimp with a look that screamed avarice. This was the first time she had tried shrimp and had decided that she loved them. Tell me, Loretta, you wouldn't happen to be Stefan's daughter, would you? Or would it be son? Or some other third thing that I don't know the name for? Ragnar's voice was very serious, as if he was not asking a question and insulting her at the same time. Why would you link me with Stefan, General? Do I look like a progeny of the elves? She asked in return, unbothered by the man's attempt at an insult. Not really. But I've already killed 3 of his sons. I thought killing one of his daughters would be a nice change of pace. Though this time he was not insulting her, the hostility he received from the devils was manifold. Basking in their killing intent, Ragnar revealed a generous smile, as if he were receiving the most relaxing of massages. After glaring at the man for a moment, Loretta relaxed again. I'm a little disappointed, General. Is that why you came here? To insult us? I would have expected a little more from the son of the Empire. Ragnar grinned and looked around the room. He looked each devil in the eyes, and none turned away from his gaze as if challenging him. Both parties knew that in a situation where a celestial could potentially be offended, there would be no combat. That effectively turned any interaction between the parties moot as they could not fight, and would not parley. In that case, it really did seem that Ragnar only came to insult them. Finally, when he had looked each devil in the eye, he turned back to Loretta and said, 12 devils. Other than Warhal Fendel, who is a confirmed anomaly, the rest don't seem to have an affiliation with Stefan the Seditious. That means it's already time for the new generation to enter the battlefield, and you're probably the first, right? I'm sure the Alliance will be interested to know that things are about to get heated once again. Without waiting for a response, Ragnar left the room. He would have liked to stay and bask in their discomfort, but he could not risk letting them realize what he had actually done. The new generation of devils sat there ignoring the man known as Hell's Butcher, unaware that he had absorbed all of their auras in a special recording device implanted in his eyes. They thought he only meant to provoke them, yet how could such an important man waste his precious time just to antagonize them? Soon, they would learn of his cunning. Who's next? Ragnar asked his soldier, already moving away from the room. The humans of Earth seem to be conducting a meeting of their own at the moment, so the beasts of Nibiru will be next. Only the sloth and deer agreed to meet, the rest have either already returned home or started preparing for the games. Lead me to them, he said, as he started planning out his moves in his head. So far, this meeting had been very fruitful for the Empire. He was eager to see what other gains he could harvest. Chapter 120 Fiery Mammoths. Unlike the devils, the beasts did not rent a room to host the meeting in. The sloth and the deer both were simply sitting in the grass that hosted the meditation room, chatting amongst themselves. I don't understand, said Greenshaven. You say that it is your job to protect Nibiru and select talented beasts, but why have I never heard of you? Or of any beasts getting selected? The universe is a cruel place, the sloth said slowly, suppressing a yawn. Staying on a small planet, living out a peaceful life is already a great gift. Only the most talented can be selected to be transferred off-planet. Not all beasts have a powerful presence in the universe. If those talents belong to a species that do, it is my job to send them there. If those talents do not belong to a species that have such a presence, then they are most likely subordinate to someone else. In that case, I would send the talents to the superior species. Then what is the qualification to be classified as a talent? Greenhaven asked. Its question was asked casually as it seemed to have already accepted that it was not good enough. After all, it had never heard of any beast stronger than itself, and its predecessors who had reached its level did not know of the sloth either, so obviously, their realm was not good enough. The sloth did not answer immediately, but looked at its single hair that had a golden tip. It really liked it. Actually, you and that little wolf have already surpassed the qualification level. When we return, I can get in touch to find out who will be recruiting you. The deer was astounded. What did it mean they had already surpassed the qualification? Why then had they never heard of anyone else being recruited? Then how come you waited so long? I've been in this realm for hundreds of years. I was sleeping, the sloth replied, as if it was the most natural answer ever. The deer was dumbfounded. How long had the sloth been sleeping? But before their conversation could continue, a party of very strong humans approached them. Even though Greenshaven knew that they were safe at the inn, the thought of humans stronger than itself made it feel unsettled. Yet the sloth besides it was also very strong, so that reassured it a little. Greetings. I am Ragnar Asulf of the Jotun Empire. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Greetings, Ragnar Asulf of the Jotun Empire, the sloth replied with declining energy. For some reason, the atmosphere at the inn made it feel so comfortable all it did was want to sleep. Both the deer and Ragnar watched the sloth, waiting for it to introduce itself, but only saw it struggle to keep its eyes open. Greetings, Ragnar Asulf of the Jotun Empire. I am Greenhavens, the deer introduced itself loudly, hoping to wake up the sloth. Its knowledge of the universe still bordered on non-existent, but it was beginning to get concerned for being assigned such an irresponsible beast. Startled awake, the sloth looked around, before remembering where it was. I am, the sloth said a few times, suddenly realizing it did not remember its own name. You can call me Golden Hair of the Three-Toed Bradius clan, the sloth proclaimed, renaming itself. Ragnar quickly went through all the beast clans he knew of, but could not recall the CLA. Still, that did not mean that this clan was small or weak. The universe was vast and Ragnar's only concern had always been the demons, so it made sense that he was not familiar with it. It is well that you came, Golden Hair continued. The others at the meeting promised to fulfill my request to bring the beasts of their planets, only you did not. I request you again, bring the beasts and expose them to broader horizons. They should not miss out on such an opportunity. Greenshaven looked at the sloth with a confused look, wondering if it realized how many beasts had missed out on opportunities because it was sleeping. Our presence on Vegas Minima is fairly new, and we have not had time to establish relations with the beasts yet. However, I will try to reach out to them. If they are willing, I will invite them. Thank you, the sloth said simply. Its eyelids started to get heavy again, and Ragnar recognized the potential for an awkward silence building up once again, so he decided to be upfront with his questions. It was quite clear that a long conversation was out of the question. Earlier you said that your planet is not without allegiance. I was wondering to whom you were referring. The Jotun Empire has many allies, it could turn out that our relations are deep. Nibiru is one of the nurturing planets controlled by the Fiery Mammoth clan, the sloth replied with eyes practically closed. His answer doused any interest Ragnar had in building an alliance. In fact, he was suddenly grateful that the devils were ready to create some trouble for the sloth. He hoped that they would succeed. I can see that you have important matters to deal with, so I won't take up more of your time. I look forward to seeing your performance in the games. With that, Ragnar quickly left. It almost seemed like he was doing his best not to run away. Suddenly, on observing the human's reaction at hearing the answer to his question, Green's Haven was very concerned for its future. Anthony, when we get back I want you to compile a report on our latest status on relations with the Fiery Mammoth clan. Also, send someone back to Minima Vegas to immediately request a diplomatic relations officer from home base. I refuse to deal with this myself. Yes sir, Anthony replied, but looked at the general with pity in his eyes. They were too far from home base, it would take weeks for a qualified officer to come, meaning Ragnar would still have to deal with it should a situation arise. Furthermore, there was no need to look up relations as everyone was clear on what the status was. Who here did not know that scandalous story? It was the talk of the Empire for centuries, when one of the noble families of the Empire had. Anthony shuddered. His rank was too low to gossip about such things. All he could say was, some men really had heavy tastes. What's next? Ragnar asked, already setting the matter behind him. The humans from Earth are still conducting their own meeting. The meeting with the devils and beasts went by faster than expected, so we still have some time. Might I recommend that you tour the inn in the meantime? Slag, do you have a recommendation for what I should investigate first? Of the services I've tried so far, Battle Axe and the Recovery Room are very interesting. Although they have limited effect on higher-level cultivators, they are still worth investigating. Other than those, I would recommend investigating the mystery trial, but that takes a long time, so you should wait till after the meeting for that. Apparently, there is a prize for completing the trial, but I have been unable to do so. Yet despite that, I gained a lot during my various attempts at the trial. True to its name, it is very mysterious. Understood. Let's investigate Battle Axe first. The soldiers made their way to Battle Axe, only to find a large crowd already waiting. Most of the beasts had already left the inn, so it was the humans of Earth that crowded around the building. As most of them were at the Foundation realm and had limited resources and heritages, a chance to get a technique based on your own requirements was unbelievable to them. As soon as the first person discovered this hidden treasure, its popularity exploded. John could not be happier and was working non-stop. Yet even with his expertise, each technique would take a few hours at the least. His greatest regret was that he could not split himself so that he could work on more work. Similar to the Battle Axe, there were crowds outside the training room and Gamer's Den as well. If Lex were awake he would have used this opportunity to buy more training and meditation rooms to meet the demand, but he was asleep, so for now the problem would persist. The crowd at Gamer's Den didn't consist of Earthlings, oddly enough. They were already familiar with the game, so they had no interest. It was the soldiers who had discovered the AR gaming mode that Lex had installed for Chen's training that crowded that building, much to Z's chagrin. He had never dealt with so many people before. He hated it. All he wanted was to watch some TV. Was that too much to ask?